Chapter 21, Cladding. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Designing an armor scheme for a mech took a lot of skills and knowledge. Ves was frankly impressed by the young Jason Kozlowski's work in making the armor of Caesar Augustus look majestic while still doing its job. Of course, he also enjoyed limitless resources and help. With an abundance of processing power, Jason could easily layer the armor plates in a way that minimized the gaps. Ves lacked a room full of processors ready to solve any problems by brute force, but the Mech Designer System came with its own perks. The designer offered a number of simulations that showed how certain sections responded to laser fire or other types of damage. It simulated a mech's maximum capacity for damage. It also had a tool that showed how to disable the mech with the least amount of effort. Using these aids saved Ves a lot of effort. Together with his newly gained medium-weight armor optimization I sub-skill, he felt competent enough to start his job as an armorer. Rather than copying Jason's armor contours, Ves decided to remove most of it and start from the bare minimum, only keeping the ingenious ways Jason and his helpers kept the joints protected. He started with the legs. For mechs, legs not only provided movement, they made sure the mech stayed stable. While the mech's engines devoted most of its power to supporting the legs, the limbs had to bear the entire mech's weight in addition to its own armor. The mech's legs were absolutely crucial to a mech's operation. Crippling even one of them might immobilize a mech, effectively achieving the same results as killing it. Protecting the legs was a top priority. The Caesar Augustus enjoyed luxurious armor on its legs. National Aeromotives knew their business when they developed its proprietary armor. It offered excellent protection at a decent weight. Now Ves somehow had to keep his Mark Antony's legs protected while not piling up too much armor. Excessive bulk reduced a mech's flexibility and speed. The Mark Antony is a spear that breaks through obstacles. It needs mobility more than armor. The legs has to facilitate a charge. It doesn't need to be excessively nimble. The Antony doesn't pretend to be a light mech in that regard. The Mark Antony featured slightly thicker armor, especially on its front axis. While it made the legs vulnerable to crippling strikes from the rear, it could take about 75% of a beating the base model's legs could endure. This was already very generous considering the enormous differences in price between V's newly acquired HRF and the original armor plating. Next came the torso. The core of any mech, it features by far the most space for its systems. The cockpit, power reactor, and engines all resided in the torso. This placed unparalleled importance on its protection, especially with regards to shielding the pilot inside. Mechs were expensive, but potentates were rarer. Only 3.5% of the total population of humans possessed the potential to pilot a mech, but not every one of them actively pursued a military career. Mechs could be gained fairly easy by spending enough credits, but pilots represented a limited resource that replenished slowly. Thus most countries treated pilots like gold but mechs like silver. The armor schemes of most mechs reflected this demand, making it the thickest part of their armor. In keeping up with the Mark Antony's indomitable intent, Ves became bold when working on the torso. He pursued aggressive lines that largely mirrored Jason's own scheme, but added more bulk to the lower torso and shaved a bit of armor from the upper torso. The upper torso of a mech usually housed the cockpit and some other delicate components that could fit by the side. Surrounded by the shoulders and arms, it took a lot to excavate the cockpit from the heavily armored chest. The lower torso housed the power reactor and engines. Their central position ensured energy and motive power could flow in all directions of a mech equally. Naturally, not all mechs followed this scheme. Some lighter mechs such as the Fantasia II swapped the positions around. In the Mark Antony's case, Ves decided keeping its engines and power reactor working his main priority. The mobility of the mech must not be compromised. The cockpit still enjoyed adequate protection, but not to the exaggerated extent of the base model. The cockpit's frontal protection got reduced by as much as 50%, an inevitability considering the HRF armor plating's lack of exceptional attributes. Layering too many plates on top of each other not only wasted V's armor budget, it also threatened to upset the mech's balance. Still, considering the HRF's much cheaper cost, it was a price worth paying in some situations. VES spent some time with the rear torso, but not too much except for thickening it a little bit. The Caesar Augustus possessed above-average rear armor, but if VES replaced it the same thickness in HRF plating, he'd turn the Mark Antony in a mech with its rear section dangerously naked. He had no choice to bulk up the rear, choosing to incorporate some subtle angles that helped deflect damage aimed at the cockpit or engines, but otherwise keeping it plain. The shoulders deserved special attention. Jason CA-1 employed shoulder launchers for long-ranged missiles. This wasn't anything unusual for mech designers who wanted to offer a long-ranged solution to round out their mech's deficiencies in that area, but Jason very clearly half-assed the attempt. The Caesar Augustus was not a mech that specialized in lengthier engagements at longer ranges, so it carried no room for additional missiles. In short, the launchers only fired the missiles in its tubes before they became useless ornaments. He considered removing them. Sure, the launchers were relatively small and light, and didn't hinder the mech's mobility all that much. On the other hand, it added little firepower beyond its initial salvo, and the addition of the system and its mechs meant its logistical footprint grew larger than what could be justified. Well, it's not like anyone has to stick to these missiles. They can easily change them to something to their liking. These days, missile systems became a lot more standardized than in the past, where each manufacturer used different sizes to monopolize the sale of refills. The missile launchers employed by Jason came from a reputable manufacturer, so plenty of missile types could fit in. Shorter-ranged missiles that lacked sophisticated guidance options packed a lot of punch, which might be crucial when employed with great timing. He spent a lot of time refining the torso before moving on to the arms. Most humanoid mechs employed arms as their primary weapon platform. They required protection from harm due to their essential role in a mech's offense, but they also had to retain their nimbleness in order to operate their weapons as smoothly as real human arms. Regarding the use of arms, mech designers generally chose from three different options. One was to keep the arms articulated like a human's, letting the mech depend on external weapons like pistols and rifles. Great importance is placed on mimicking the arms to its biological equivalent, sometimes achieving a synchronization of up to 99%. This allowed marksmen to fire their weapons as accurately as they could in real life without depending on aim assist and other guided aids, which provides a remarkable advantage in certain times. Another route was to embed weapons in the wrists. Usually smaller and less powerful than handheld weapons, it kept the arms free to wield weapons while simultaneously offered additional firepower without detrimentally affecting weight and carrying capacity all that much. However, such weapon systems needed to be fed energy or other resources from the torso. Accommodating these needs weakened the arms internally and created more weak points. The wrist-mounted weapons also unbalanced the arms and made hand-mounted weaponry less accurate. The third, most extreme way of employing arms was to replace the lower arm or even the entire arm for a dedicated weapon emplacement. This made mechs lose the ability to hold external equipment, but they gained a powerful weapon affixed to a stable platform. Mech designers generally regarded these designs as trying to marry a tank into a mech. Such a solution is generally employed on frontline mass production models. Larger mech core made the best use of large numbers of uniformly equipped mechs and also had the most need for large caliber weaponry that the weapon arms usually affixed. In the case of the Caesar Augustus, Jason went with the wrist-mounted weapons. The laser cannons were actually high-quality weapons even in the current generation. They provided a substantial amount of short to medium-ranged firepower as long as the mech's energy lasted. They did have a tendency to overheat the mech, and with V's HRF replacing the base model's heat-resistant armor, the Mark Antony had a much smaller capacity to absorb the heat. VES could only tune down the cannons to a lower default setting, allowing it to last a little longer. The base model employed a sword and a shield as the mech's melee weapon. This lowered the demand for articulation, so VES happily bulked up the arms in order to improve its armor and heat absorption. It stiffened the arms, but VES did not place excessive demands on the mech's accuracy. Its laser cannons remained effective in medium range, only having trouble in closer ranges due to the ability for lighter mechs to circle swifter than a mech's ability to rotate. This left VES with the armaments. Made with the same materials as the armor, the heavy shield could endure a lot of damage at an acceptable weight. The valiant-looking sword possessed enough qualities to cut through enemy armor when it was treated slightly differently at the end of the manufacturing process. Ves wouldn't be able to retain the original shield's design. It offered too little protection for too much weight. At its current state, Ves could either increase or decrease the size of the shield. The HRF plating is cheap, so I should employ the shield as a disposable object. The Mark Antony's main feature is its ability to charge and break through the enemy line, so I'll make it longer and thicker. With the designer's helpful tools, he reconstructed the bulky kite shield of the base model into a longer and slightly thicker tower shield. Taking inspiration from the equipment of the historical ancient Rome, Ves emulating the iconic curved rectangular shields. When held in its armed position, the mech could cover almost the entire mech's length, protecting it from the knees to the lower half of its head. The specific length prevented the lower edge of the shield from bumping into terrain and also left the mech's eyes unobstructed by the upper edge. The shield turned out to be incredibly heavy and was difficult to move, but it also covered a lot more area so it didn't need to. Made entirely out of cheap HRF plating, pilots wouldn't feel any heartache when they threw it away if it sustained too much damage or if the mech required a burst of speed. Ves was highly satisfied with the end result. The big rectangular shield fit heavy infantrymen more than cavalry, but Ves didn't bother reconciling these contradictions. He only borrowed the ancient Roman theme to make his mech look cooler. As for the weapon, the HRF was distinctly unsuited to serve as a sword material. Its composition focused fully on frontal protection, and couldn't retain an edge suitable for bladed weaponry. It also broke much easier when struck hard. He'd either have to change to a different weapon or keep the arm empty. The HRF only excels at cost. Ves took the same approach as with the shield. He bulked up the mech's weapon and didn't bother adding any edge. He eventually ended up with a short mace with a bulky rounded end. Since the mech already carried quite a bit of weight from its armor and shield, Ves hadn't opted for something larger like a hammer or staff. Despite the mace's simple looks, it still dealt a fair bit of damage if the pilot put its weight behind its attacks. It kind of sucks. Too bad I can't afford another production license. Even the virtual licenses cost too many credits for Ves to bother buying them. He had to hoard money for now in preparation for producing a real mech. Only the head remained now. In modern mechs, the head housed the best sensors of a mech. It was a rather poor position for something so important. It stuck out too much. However, most humanoid mechs retain the head due to pilots massively preferring their main view to come from such an elevated position. Mechs that hadn't bothered with heads and moved their main sensors to the torso, the so-called Pangu types, never really caught on in the market. The Caesar Augustus featured an ornate head design that appealed to Jason's aesthetics. It housed fairly good sensors behind enough armor and embellishments to make them difficult to pick off by a stray shot. Ves hadn't messed around with the head too much, but he did add a dramatic touch by adding a vertical helmet crest, much like the cool helmets worn by the soldiers of ancient Rome and Greece. For its plume, Ves embedded the small festive cloud generator at its neck. With some creative plumbing, he ensured the cloud generator's red vapor to erupt from the head crest in an even fashion. He put enough power in the ejection of vapor that it held onto its semicircular shape in the wind even if the mech moved around. Having finished working on the exterior, Ves stepped back and beheld the entire mech. It matched what Ves envisioned for the Mark Antony. A medium mech carrying a heavy shield to facilitate its tendency for head-on and charges and collisions. Discarding the shield allowed the mech to regain its mobility, enhancing its maneuverability in melee combat and leaving a hand free for a spare pistol or knife. Despite the long hours of fiddling with armor plates and figuring out the best arrangements, Ves enjoyed the entire process with the enthusiasm of a kid trying a new toy. The designer's many tools allowed him to waste less time with boring calculations, leaving him more time to utilize his sharpened creativity to come up with aggressive designs. His work culminated in a mech that embodied V's intent of aggression, momentum, burst power, and a little bit of flamboyance. Whilst Ves expected the armoring process to be the most challenging job, his method of channeling his intent while he made his designs paid off. He was sure that others could have done a much better job, but he did a decent enough attempt that he could confidently say he hadn't wasted his time. Now, it's time to revisit the internals. Chapter 22, Craftsman's Pride. You are listening at novelfull.audio. A mech's armor defined the machine's appearance. The changes made to the internals might not be visible to outsiders, but it affected the heart and soul of the mech. His experiences in muddling around with the Nero and making more focused modifications with the Nero Redivitus taught him a lot about the design philosophy behind the Caesar Augustus. Ves already knew that Jason wanted to cram as much goodies in his frame as possible. This adversely affected the mech's internal integrity, as any damage that passed by its armor could spark a cascade of faults. While Jason relied on National Aeromotive's excellent armor to mitigate this issue, Ves had to make do with Marlin Solutions' budget-focused 1004 HRF 5th generation. Despite his best efforts, the Mark Antony's armor only withstood about a third as much as the original armor in the worst locations. The best places only matched the original armor by 80%, which was already extremely generous. With an armor scheme that only protected the Mark Antony's internals by an average of 50% of the base model, Ves wondered if he should vacate some unnecessary components in order to make room for more structural support. The internals of a mech consisted of every component underneath a mech's outer shell. The internal frame that acted as the skeleton of the Caesar Augustus was strong and thick. It needed to be, as it sometimes came under intense stress due to the weight it carried and the attacks it bore when the armor was penetrated. The highly durable synthetic muscles that controlled its limbs also took a lot of space, as an abundance of power was required to move the CA-1's generous armor. The components themselves varied in their requirements. The cockpit, engine and power reactor all took up most of the space in the torso, but other systems such as sensors and processors had plenty of space in the mech's otherwise useless head. The pipes and cabling that connected the components together looked thin, but added up together they made up a significant and important portion of a mech's internal space. The original Caesar Augustus models came installed with some truly fine components. Even though the mech was now considered last generation, the quality of its numerous components allowed the mech to overcome most current generation frontline models as long as its energy lasted. However, this led to the CA-1's internal space becoming congested by cabling, as all those components needed to be connected to the engines, power reactor, cockpit or more. It exceeded all the recommended safety margins Ves learned in college. The mech only supported so much weight. The Caesar Augustus had been classified as a medium mech. Such mechs were the mainstays of battles, able to dodge slow attacks and tank the lighter ones. To retain the minimum amount of mobility required to pilot the mech in such a manner, Jason already stretched the Caesar Augustus to its maximum limits. Any heavier and the mech would end up into an uncomfortable weight class beyond medium weight but lighter than heavyweight. It was hardly able to dodge most attacks, but its armor couldn't endure against a sustained assault. Ves mulled the difficult problem of solving the mech's internal structure while keeping his mech effective in performing its role. The Mark Antony is aggressive. As long as it's able to charge at the enemy and thump them in the opening moments, it's sufficient. Battles of attrition and extended engagements are not its specialties. The mech doesn't demand too much endurance. His first internal modification was to make the painful decision to remove 15% of the mech's energy cells. This reduced the mech's ability to sustain a pitched battle, but it freed up quite a bit of space. Mechs generally featured two kinds of energy cells. The most often used cells acted as batteries or capacitors with a fair amount of readily available energy. These battery-type cells could be used to power a high-intensity laser cannon, allowing the weapon to fire in quick succession as it drained power very fast. Battery cells generally were employed on mechs that depended highly on energy weapons and were expected to fight short but intensive fights. Other types of energy cells carried fuels or other energetic materials. While these cells couldn't provide an immediate boost of energy to power a weapon, they provided a lot more energy for the same amount of weight and space. When these fuels were injected into a power reactor, the mech enjoyed a steady output of energy that could sustain it in a medium-intensity battle for an extended time. This energy profile worked great for mechs that emphasized endurance and staying power, such as frontline mass-production mechs. The energy cells Jason used were high-end batteries that provided the mech with a decent amount of instantaneous energy. However, once they were drained, the Mark Antony could only rely on its slower working power reactor. At low-intensity mode, these usually provided enough power to keep a mech moving, but could not power anything else, such as weaponry. Ves dared to reduce the amount of energy cells because he had also tuned down the wrist-mounted laser cannons previously. The weapons should last the same amount of time even with a reduced maximum capacity. Naturally, this came at the expense of a mech's total damage output, which many mech pilots placed an undue amount of attention on. It was also just plain uncomfortable knowing you'd run out of juice faster. It nevertheless freed up sufficient space to rearrange some placements in order to optimize the extra breathing room Ves created. He carried out more extensive modifications than the ones he made with the Nero and Nero Redivitus. With the older variants, he had to really force himself to squeeze maximum value out of every millimeter he moved something away. The larger buffer of space he had now did wonders in untangling a crowded internal space. It was like rearranging a crowded suitcase, when you had stuffed it with clothes, toiletries and other objects to the point that it wouldn't close. There came a point when no matter how many tricks you pulled, you couldn't reduce the volume any further. Simply removing a few unimportant items let the suitcase have a breath of air, allowing the owner to easily fill up any excess empty space and ensure the contents were distributed equally. Ves kind of treated his design the same way. The energy cells didn't take up a lot of space, but removing a chunk of them still freed up 5% of the mech's internal volume. This allowed him to shift Part A, making room for the shifting of Part B, which made room for Part C, and so on until Ves could finally untangle the highly congested portions of Parts 10 and Y. It took several days of constant work to rearrange the base model's internals. The modifications he made reduced the amount of weak points by at least half. The mech's ability to receive internal structure damage had improved quite significantly. Not to the point of calling his mech a zombie, but just enough to make up for the Mark Antony's inferior armor. Ves made sure to prioritize the most critical components related to the engines and power reactor. Above all else, the mech had to keep running. The Mark Antony neared its completion. Ves had put the finishing touches on its internals and even readjusted some of the armor's contours in order to accommodate the changes. A faint and barely present sense of anticipation built up in Ves. In the end, he spent 2 weeks pouring much of his heart and soul into creating the Mark Antony. The mech represented his first foray into real mech design. Then why do I feel my design is incomplete? Ves wondered as he zoomed out the mech's image in the designer. He felt a sense of incongruity that prevented him from finalizing his design. There is something lacking about my mech. This was the intuition Ves had recently acquired when he crafted based on intent. It guided his actions and decisions, not necessarily making him choose the most efficient routes, but always one that fit. When Ves studied the mech's crest and the red plumes floating out of the narrow slit, he finally realized it. It's the paint job. The Caesar Augustus came primarily in white. Jason chose this color in order to echo ancient marble statues of majestic figures. The Mark Antony lacked the regal air of a ruler. Ves instead molded it in the image of an aggressive vanguard. The stately white appearance felt out of place. Luckily the standard paints only cost a couple of thousand credits. Ves muttered, and went to work in the designer's painting function. He chose to dye the mech in black, and accompanied it with red and bronze accents. It contrasted nicely with the Caesar Augustus, and gave his own design an intimidating, bloodthirsty appearance. He dyed the shield in red as well, and added a couple of yellow stylized eagle wings and lightning bolts in homage to the historical Mark Antony's homeland. Ves stepped back and viewed his mech in its entirety. The dark colors, the aggressive contours, the red vapor helmet crest, it all combined together in a mech designed for battle. It exuded masculinity. Where the Caesar Augustus' stately appearance made it suitable to rally its subordinates in battle, the Mark Antony instead preferred to press upon the enemy. It was time to finish the new design and let the system take a critical look at his work. I'm ready. Let's hear it, system. Gimme your best shot. Design evaluation, CA-1C Mark Antony. Variant name, CA-1C Mark Antony, base model, Caesar Augustus CA-1. Original manufacturer, National Aeromotives. Weight classification, medium heavy, recommended role, shock trooper, armor, C+, carrying capacity, D. Aesthetics, A-, endurance, D-, energy efficiency, C-, flexibility, E. Firepower, B-, integrity, C+, mobility, D+, spotting, C-, X-factor, C-, deviance, 35%, performance improvement, dash 35%. Cost efficiency, plus 60%, overall evaluation, an acceptable variant of the Caesar Augustus. Though very lacking in its armor compared to the base model, it has achieved an admirable amount of cost savings over the original model. You have received 200 design points for completing an original design variant of a last-generation mech with significant cost savings. You have received 500 design points for designing a mech with a moderate presence of X-factor. The system added a new parameter since the last time he received a design evaluation. Reducing the cost of V's first real variant had been a top priority for him, and it was nice for the system to acknowledge his intentions and take the time to judge whether he succeeded. Considering he made the mech 60% cheaper while only losing 35% performance, he had accomplished his aim. Ves felt he had tasted what true mech designers called pride. In order to come this far, he gambled his workshop and his father's legacy. He rejected all other career opportunities and insisted on running his own business. "This is worth every sacrifice I made so far," he said as he inspected the Mark Antony's design from every angle. This was a product of his own design. He could base his nascent mech boutique on the sales of this new design. The invisible but potentially influential X-factor was the single biggest draw of this mech. Ves devoted almost all of his time constructing his mech with a single purpose in mind. Though not a mech pilot himself, as its designer he felt the Mark Antony possessed a faint aura of aggression. His customers might not be aware his design could spark the X-factor, but it remained a minor benefit even if they remained clueless about the X-factor. He was sure the Mark Antony could please his customers. The variant might not feature excellent specs, but it cost 60% less to build compared to the base model, allowing him to set a competitive price if he wanted to drive sales. Naturally, he'd have to pay taxes and license fees for every mech he made and sold. Yet even the crumbs left over was sufficient to reinvest back in his business, allowing him to upgrade his machines and license more mechs and components. Even better, he'd gain more opportunities to earn a lot of DP. Hot damn! 700 design points. That's more than twice than what I'm earning in a week. And his existing sales also kept diminishing. The apparent craze about the Fantasia variants had run its course, and every young mech pilot that wanted to own a Seraphim, Phantasm or Nomad already bought them. This reinforced the notion that Ves always had to keep moving on. He couldn't rest his laurels after designing a successful mech variant. Also, I can earn a shipload of DP designing a mech that's still in use today compared to 100 prehistoric mechs. It made sense. Costs had risen while technology advanced and became more complex. The 400-year-old one-star mechs exercised the knowledge Ves learned in college, but he hadn't truly made any breakthroughs. In contrast, Ves learned much more about mech design when he worked on what Iron Spirit considered a 5-star mech. With the points he already saved up, Ves possessed just over 1,000 DP. It represented an unexpected windfall, and opened up many goodies in the system store. Lottery tickets, attribute candies, I can even buy a brand new 3D printer for my workshop. Ves muttered to himself as he gulped his saliva. There's even a time capsule that allows me to slow time by 2 times. How crazy is that? The system's so powerful it can even affect spacetime. Perhaps the system wasn't bluffing when it boasted it was omnipotent as long as it had enough DP. He shook his head. Gotta stop dreaming these fanciful ideas. I've already budgeted my upcoming DP spending. With a reluctant and painful gesture, Ves bought the assembly skill upgrade from the skill tree. A whoosh of energy burst in his mind as an explosion of knowledge started to press on his brain. He screamed in pain as he felt information he once read but never really understood become clear as day. Outside data also continued to stream in, settling into the deepest parts of his brain. Ves breathed deeply once his brain stopped stampeding inside his skull. I thought I did decently in my studies, but it turned out I was too ignorant. Raising his assembly skill to apprentice level deeply impressed him of the power of the system once again. He imagined he went through school as an average slacker, only to trip on the ground and hurt his head, causing him to inexplicably turn into a genius. He learned so much about assembly that it put his previous work to shame. The benefit of learning a main skill was much more comprehensive than upgrading a single sub-skill like learning how to operate 3D printers. He filled a lot of gaps that fell in the cracks between his increased proficiencies in operating the 3D printer and assembly machines. I'm ready to bring this design to life. Naturally, Ves wanted to fabricate the mech. It was too risky to build up the mech for real, but constructing it in the simulated environment of Iron Spirit will allow him to test his product and iron out the kinks he missed. Chapter 23, Cell. You are listening at novelfull.audio. When Ves logged into Iron Spirit, he visited the support section in order to register a free virtual license. The game charged a lot of credits for the virtual license of the Marlin Solutions 1004 HRF 5th generation armor plating. Considering that anyone could make a living if they designed and sold even a halfway decent mech, the prices weren't unreasonable. The support staff processed his request promptly. Ves had made this request before, so they still possessed all of his information. After confirming that he possessed an authentic production license for the armor, he received his approval half an hour later. With all the paperwork done, he loaded the Mark Antony's design file into the virtual workshop. Let's get to working. Still motivated from his previous evaluation, Ves had no trouble getting into the right mood. The Mark Antony embodied aggressive passion, so in order to keep its X-factor intact, Ves entered a state of mild frenzy. With the help of his much more comprehensive assembly skills, he operated his 3D printer with gusto. Parts rolled off the printer as if he printed paper. It was not as if his skill in operating the 3D printer had improved remarkably. The reason for his increased fluency was that his knowledge base had increased. He knew better how to tweak the printer in such a way that it resulted in less problems when fabricating a particular component. Rigid armor needed to be treated much differently than delicate sensors. Heat affected one procedure much more, while another fabrication process couldn't be done properly unless vibrations stopped. All these kinds of trivial details that Ves neglected to learn had come to the front of his mind. The ease in which he applied the newly learned knowledge impressed him of the power the system wielded once again. Naturally, not every component came out perfectly. Knowledge did not necessarily translate to better tool use. It was like learning how to play a piano by studying a book. At least the armor plates came off without any deficiencies. The HRF required a lot of processing to produce, but all it took was time and loads of resources. As mass production armor, it had been developed in a way to make it easier to produce in bulk. Fabricating one set of armor plates for his mech was easy. Ves moved to the assembler and worked to put the parts together. From the internal frame, to the components, to the artificial musculature, to the cabling and pipes, until finally he molded the last pieces of armor in their places. His assembly skill allowed him to optimize the order in which he put the components together, avoiding a couple of difficulties arising from inconvenient spacing. Working with parts that lacked any major defects also helped smooth the process along. Frankly, the fabrication process could still be improved. With his prior experience in working with the Caesar Augustus, Ves felt confident he wouldn't screw up if he had to fabricate the Mark Antony in his real universe workshop. His biggest difficulty was actually sustaining the proper intent while fabricating the mech. Despite his best efforts, it took over a day of work to finish the mech, and it was impossible to maintain the same mood throughout the fabrication process. He took brief pauses whenever possible, but his time constraints urged him to keep working. He nearly collapsed when his virtual workshop finished testing the finished mech. Lucky left his perch at the couch and bumped his head against his body with worry. I'm fine, buddy. The specifications sheet showed his mech possessed no faults. Only minor errors marred the mech's performance, but they only impacted it in a minor fashion. In other areas, the specs performed as expected. Now I have to set the price. The art of pricing was a subjective and delicate art. The Caesar Augustus CA-1 sold for a default price of 50,000 credits in the in-game market. As Ves had built the CA-1 himself once before, he knew the game set the base model's cost of raw materials at 40,000 credits. Without taking into account the cost of labor and the time spent to produce the model, Ves could expect a profit of 10,000 credits a sale just for pumping out the base model. The Mark Antony cost a lot less to produce. Iron Spirit only charged Ves with 18,000 credits for the raw materials. He had to thank the HRF armor plating for that. The reduction didn't entirely account to the cost savings in reality, but that was because the fees associated with the licenses remained fixed. Even if Ves replaced every component of the Caesar Augustus with discarded paper and wood, he'd still pay several thousand credits at a minimum. The Caesar Augustus only outperformed the Mark Antony by about 35%. If Ves wanted to set a price based on utility value alone, he'd set the credit price at about 29,000 credits. This provided Ves a profit margin of 11,000 credits, a significant improvement for a variant that's cheaper and faster to produce than its base model. It's not all sunny though. Not all mechs were sold through credits. A lot of players spent their in-game gold to buy the virtual mechs. The exchange rate between gold and credits was never fixed, as players with certain privileges could buy gold for credits, but not the other way around. The BSBH Corporation didn't want to lose any money on their game. This also meant that mech designers like Ves could not earn any real credits when players bought one of his designs with gold. Fucking greedy bastards. With the astronomical amount of revenue they're earning each year, they could spare the 0.01% of money they earn to remunerate the designers that work their asses off in their virtual workshops. Ves was able to disable the gold prices if he wanted to. Plenty of elite designers did so in fact. These famed designers produced great works that sold well even if players had to fork real credits for their work. Ves had no fame or reputation to rely on to sell his products with real money, so he left the gold prices alone. With 2 weeks left to go until the Young Tigers exhibition starts, I don't have the time to advertise my mech. I'll just set a reasonable price to keep sales going. CA-1C Mark Antony, Tier 5 Star, Base Model, Caesar Augustus CA-1. Purchase price, 425,000 gold, minus 50%. Premium price, 25,000 bright credits. The in-game price of 425,000 gold was a steal for a mech with such a performance. However, even if the handcrafted version got sold, the automated mass production model still remained within tolerance at 850,000 gold. It was unfortunate that Ves wasn't exactly sure if the X Factor still worked if the game took over production. It'll introduce a weak link between the trinity of designer, mech and pilot. The intent of a cold machine in charge of pumping out mechs and nothing else will pollute the emotions I've invested in the design. Perhaps the design's impressive X-Factor rating of C, as given by the system, might get demoted to a D or E rating. It probably won't drop any further. My intent is so strongly embedded in its contours that some of it will likely stick even if the most unfeeling robots worked on my design. And from what he understood, the game would be stupid to simulate such a tedious process. Iron Spirit merely copied the mech designer's handcrafted design, reduced the specifications a little, and slapped a doubled gold price for its efforts. In such a case, the X Factor should retain a large amount of its potency. At least I hope so. X Factor can't be measured as far as I know, and I'm still not completely certain it can express itself in a virtual game. Ves planned to look it up later when his model got sold. He logged on to the Galactic net to do his usual marketing routine. He left messages at message boards and online communities. Hopefully the mech received enough exposure from someone to make the first sale. All I can do now is wait on that front. He checked his spending account and found he could afford to fabricate the Mark Antony again. Having nothing better to do for the next 2 weeks, he dove into the virtual workshop again to handcraft another mech. I'm going to need all the practice I can get. The more models I build, the better I'll be able to build the real version of the Mark Antony. Screwing up in the virtual world only resulted in a few hundred credits worth of damage. Messing up in the real world might mean writing off 1,000,000 credits if the mistake was costly. He couldn't afford to get tripped up by the more challenging portions of the fabrication process. Meanwhile, many light years away from Cloudy Curtain, Ves Larkinson sat at his desk, processing the paperwork for the day. His comm unit lit up as he received a call. "Hey Uncle Arkansas. Melinda." The man smiled, releasing his hard-faced expression now that he spoke to one of his favorite cousins. "Since you're calling me while I'm still on duty, I suspect you have something that can't wait." "Right-o. You know about Ves, right? That he's recently received a pair of production licenses from God knows where." Ark frowned at the mention. The so-called Future Sons Technology Institution were run by people he'd never heard of, received donations from empty shell companies, and offered no means to apply for any of its grants. As far as the Larkinsons had found out, the FSTI was a cover for a third-party influence. The question was who? The Vesians? The new Rubarthans? The Terrans? Ark dismissed those options from his minds. Ves was too insignificant to bother manipulating. "We're still looking into this organization. New Rubarthans can be remarkably opaque in their bookkeeping. They're running so many plots against each other that they've taken shady accounting to the highest level." Melinda grinned, not really worried about what was happening with Ves. "The kid is fine. The production licenses are held in his name, so the Institute can't take that away from him now. Let's shelve this discussion for later." "What did you call me for, Melinda?" The woman's grin widened. Ves finally did it. He just released a mech that looks like it's going to be his first money maker. He was working on modifying the Caesar Augustus. That's not an easy thing to do. It's been only a month or so since he received the mech production license. When I checked on his progress, all he released so far were models with only marginal changes. This time it's different. He successfully incorporated the HRF armor. That is faster than we'd expected. Ark replied, his eyebrows raised. The technicians I consulted at the depot told me it's not simple to fully replace a mech's armor. Though he lacked the technical background to understand the finer points in mech design, as a veteran mech commander he still knew a thing or two. If replacing a mech's armor with a different composition was so easy, then the market would be flooded with re-armored mechs. In actuality, any seasoned mech designer could do the same, but they disdained playing around with customizing someone else's design. They'd rather work on their own projects, in order to avoid losing a massive amount of revenue paying licensing fees. Melinda swiped her hand, causing her comm unit to send a document over to her uncle. "You should look at the mock-up images and the spec sheet. It's an exceptional work for a designer as fresh as Ves. He has my respect so far." Ark nodded as his eyes swept over the specifications with a laser focus. "It's a shame what happened to Wrinkle, but the sudden responsibility has done the boy a lot of good. Boo-hoo, my little Vesey is all grown up now. He doesn't want to cuddle with big sister Melinda anymore." Melinda mock cried with fake tears. Then she resumed smiling. "Anyway, I'm here to borrow some credits from the family. I spent all my salary on some new digs, so I can't take my little cousin's mech for a spin. And you know I don't play Iron Spirit all that often, so I don't have enough gold either. You don't have to worry on that account. Your Uncle Cantor bought every single mech the boy released in the game and reported back to us of his impressions. Well, this ain't one of V's practice designs. This is the real deal, a mech that Ves plans to sell in the real universe." Melinda slammed her fists together. "I think we owe it to him as a family to push along his sales. Your grandpa was quite clear on this, Melinda. We will only purchase one mech for testing purposes, no more. Then at least give me the credits to test the new mech. I can do the job just as well as Uncle Cantor. He won't be happy. Then he can buy the mech with his own money." The two Larkinsons stared at each other over the comm, its signals instantly sent across star systems. "Fine. You'll have your credits. I expect a professional review of V's work. Don't try to slant things in his way. Sure, I know how to do my job. Ark slided his hands, opening up a small menu. After selecting his banking options, he prepared to send over some cash to Melinda. How many credits? Only 25,000 bright credits. It's a lot cheaper than his Nero Thingy. That does sound cheap, for a variant based off the Caesar Augustus. After sending the credits, Melinda bid him a quick goodbye, leaving Ark alone in his office and a terminal full of reports to sign off. He resumed reading the latest report, an intelligence update that remarked about the unknown parties being sighted near the country's border to the alien race referred to as the Basilisks. As a commanding officer in the Bright Republic's Mech Corp, he knew more about the undercurrent running throughout this star sector the last few years. Explorers, mercenaries and pirates have sporadically shown up at the borders of an alien race they should not have any dealings with. It smacked of another third party interfering in their star sector, not that they'd find any evidence, and even if they did, so what? Unless it's the Ves Kingdom or any of the other third-rate states, the Bright Republic couldn't afford to confront the bigger powers. The woe of a small country. Ark smiled ruefully. The issues concerning Ves paled in comparison to what was on his plate. Chapter 24, Melinda. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Melinda Larkinson had a busy life. As a junior member of the Bentheim Planetary Guard, she spent most of the time on patrols or back at base learning the ropes. As she was determined to reach the pinnacle of mech piloting, she continually sharpened her skills by sorting out troublemakers and sparring against her fellow guardsmen. A great number of business flowed through Bentheim, the economic port of the Bright Republic. Due to a complex system of spatial distortions, spaceships had an easier time navigating towards Bentheim. This especially facilitated ultra-long-ranged FTL or faster-than-light travel. Put simply, a ship can travel directly towards Bentheim without making any stops in between in order to reorient themselves and cycle the FTL drive. Humanity actually stole the FTL technology they use today from a long-exterminated alien race. Through hundreds of years of study and refinement, they have already pushed their knowledge base on the tech to its limits. Nowadays, to go from one end of human space to the other only required a couple of years of non-stop travel. The existence of FTL-friendly ports formed the basis that made this swift travel possible. Bentheim therefore formed the economic heart that kept the Bright Republic prosperous. It also invited greedy eyes, such as their ever-present rival the Ves Kingdom. Not content with their own port system, they always hungered to invade the Bright Republic's territory and snatch the strategic planet away for themselves. Some of trouble the Bentheim Planetary Guard had to handle could be traced to the covert actions of the Vesians. Just the last month alone Melinda had to respond to several emergencies. One case was a lone wolf who took an illicit drug and went on a rampage with his heavy mech. Another case involved a family who fell into ruin in the past returning from the dead and taking on one of Bentheim's established family businesses. Then there were always the ever-present pirates skulking in the outskirts, ready to snap up a lightly defended transport convoy. Though only in the service for 4 years, the amount of petty and not-so-petty conflicts she had to resolve numbered in the hundreds. While not a genuine substitute to the high-intensity battles of a full-scale war, Melinda was able to increase her experience and sharpen her initially rough piloting skills. Right now, Melinda finished her shift for the day. She deposited her mech at the hangar, waved the technicians goodbye, and left for the guard's exclusive training center. Hey Melly. A fellow junior guard pilot sidled up to Melinda. What's up? I can see the smile in your eyes a light year away. Got a date or something? Melinda huffed. I wish Janet. Nah, I nagged my uncle for a few thousand credits and pried it out of his hands. Wow. And he let you do that? Must be nice to be a Larkinson. Janet held out her hand as if she was a crippled grandmother. Spare some alms for a poor commoner. Ouch. Janet received a playful punch in return. Scram. I already have something in mind. Melinda entered the training center with a curious Janet trailing after her. They skipped past the physical exercise rooms and entered the virtual simulation area. Oh, are you going to spar against someone again? Not really. Melinda grinned. She picked a random simulator pod and hopped right inside. I'm going to play a game. Iron Spirit? Huh, it's been a long time since I last logged in. I must have dropped down to the bottom of the Platinum League by now. Janet laughed with faint contempt. After all, playing a game never beat the real deal. Shaking her head, Melinda was about to close the pod. I'm not logging into the game just to fool around. Grab a pod and log into the game. Let's add each other to our friend lists. I'll show you what I'm about in-game. Shrugging, Janet hopped into a pod, curious what Melinda wanted to do with a large bunch of credits. Don't tell me she wants to buy a virtual mech. Is she crazy? If she wants to gain experience with advanced mechs, there's plenty of other programs installed in the simulators. After the two young women logged into the game, they searched for their counterpart and added each other to their lists. Janet playfully hugged Melinda's virtual body. I'm here now. Please tell me what you're up to now. We'll have to take a visit to the market for that. They both entered the market, encountering a bustle of virtual avatars and computer-controlled personnel. Instead of approaching one of the many public access terminals to call up a shopping interface, Melinda led her colleague through the narrow streets of the simulated market city. She took a sharp turn into an alley and entered a small, rickety shop with a wooden door that almost seemed to fall apart. The interior hosted no furniture and almost appeared abandoned if not for the glowing blue ball floating in the room. Welcome to Chasing Cloud's Mech Shop. How may I assist you, customers? The default robotic shopkeeper asked the pair. Wow, Mel, are you sure you want to buy something from this shifty store? I don't think the owner even bothered investing a single penny in this store. Melinda just bumped Janet onto the head. This store's owned by my cousin, Dweeb. He's a little short on cash so he can't waste it on a frivolous expenditure like a virtual shop. Most sales happen through the public terminals or from a mech pilot's exclusive room. The lively city and its many ancient-looking storefronts were only recent additions to the game. The BSBH Corporation wanted to increase Iron Spirit's appeal by facilitating social interactions. The only reason why I brought you here is so you can take a closer look at the mech my cousin designed. Oh. This is the first time I heard of you having a cousin who works as a mech designer. Is it an original design? How can it be an original design? Melinda shook her head as she navigated the menu provided by the shopkeeper. It's only a variant, but it's also quite impressive. With a final press of her finger, the dark and empty shop seemed to fade away into an endless starry sight. A mech gradually materialized in front of the two women. The Mark Antony revealed its dark and menacing visage to the two women for the first time. This. My cousin calls it the Mark Antony. It's a cheaper variant of the Caesar Augustus. Impressive, huh? Wow. And you say it's cheap? It looks just as grand as the original Caesar Augustus, just with a different flavor. The dark armor plates, the blood-red shield with its lightning bolts and eagle wings, the various red and bronze accents, they all contributed to an image of unbridled bloodlust and aggression. What's that cool-looking thing at the top? Janet curiously asked as she spotted the strange helmet crest and the red vapor spouting quietly from the slit at the top. Beats me. My cousin used the festive cloud generator that's famous on his home planet to achieve this effect. Haha, he actually used a party trick on such a serious mech. Janet laughed, though she inwardly admitted that it added very nicely to the mech's flamboyant flair. So what's its tier and how much for one? It's a middling tier 5 mech, but it costs just 25,000 credits. Sounds like a good deal to me. Janet nodded. Despite not having logging in for a year, she still retained much of her knowledge of the game, including the going prices of virtual mechs. If it's as good as the Caesar Augustus, then it's a steal. Melinda swiped her hand, removing the illusion and returning the pair back to the shop. She went through with the purchase. How can my cousin throw away money like that? He made a lot of changes, but the most important one is he replaced the stock armor with the 1004 HRF. The fucking HRF? That shitty armor the bean counters at the office love so much. Wow, your cousin should win an award for using such a cheap material to make such a cool-looking mech. No wonder it carries such a huge shield. Once Melinda finished her purchase, the pair exited the store and they walked back to the central plaza where they could transfer to different areas. Give me 15 minutes so I can get the hang of my new mech. Let's head into a match after that, okay? Sure, Melly. I need to go through my mech stable and make sure my mechs are still configured right. I haven't played in ages, after all. What game mode do you want to queue up for? I vote for the 2v2 arena. Melinda shook her head. I won't be able to play the Mark Antony to its fullest potential in an arena match. Let's queue up for the Wartorn instances. Damn, sister, so you want to jump straight into it. I'll go prepare a long-range support mech for you then, because you'll need the cover. As Janet left to sort out her neglected game account, Melinda entered her mech stable and walked to the stall where her new purchase awaited her entry. The dark mech emanated an invisible aura even as it silently stood inert. It feels as if I'm being sucked into hell. Melinda shivered a little, unnerved that a mech that hadn't even started up give out so much intensity even if she couldn't describe what she felt. It's as if this mech is not a machine but a god. Even as she closed the distance, the unease increased. She activated a lift to bring her up the cockpit that opened up from the chest. Like entering the belly of a beast, she slipped inside and strapped herself on the chair. It's just a mech and not a monster, so why am I being so melodramatic? That she calmed herself down and booted up the mech. It came to life with a flicker, causing its golden eyes to shine like twin suns as various systems engaged their checks. After all the systems reported no errors, Melinda finally gained full control over the mech. It blew away the constant unease Melinda felt before. It was as if it was all an illusion. Okay now, I only have a few minutes to get used to its quirks. Melinda dove into controlling her mech with gusto. After using the neural interface to connect with her mech, she felt as if she had become a giant filled with strength. The neural interface worked great, with no lingering issues unlike with older, second-hand interfaces. The Mark Antony's shield overburdened her shield arm, throwing her mech out of balance. She carefully trod then jogged then sprinted with her mech, getting familiar with the angled posture required to move with her tower shield held in front. She then repeated the same motions only without the shield, just to see how much her speed had been affected. The 15 minutes came and went in a flash. Janet opened up a private conversation with Melinda. Come on Melly, show me what you can do with that beast. Alright. I'm kind of curious as well if my cousin's work can stand up to a real fight. The both of them paired up and entered matchmaking for one of Iron Spirit's larger game mode, the Wartorn instances. It simulated real battlefield circumstances, as most mech battles between the smaller human states employed at least a few dozen mechs. Wartorn instances usually played out as a team deathmatch mode with an impressive amount of players on each team, ranging from the standard 50v50 to a gigantic 1000v1000 during special events. Since Melinda wanted to drop into combat immediately, she selected the fastest 50v50 mode. Only a couple of minutes were required for Iron Spirit to match them up with 98 other Platinum League players around the galaxy. Iron Spirit customarily limited the matchmaking for Bronze League to a single planet or star system. Only until a player reached Silver, they'd be able to play with mech pilots from many light years away, though in the lower leagues most of their teammates and opponents came from the same star sector. Naturally, as career pilots, Melinda and Janet easily achieved their platinum ranks, and had the qualifications to play in a league filled with veterans, esports athletes and geniuses. As the large map started to load, the 50 players of Team Blue, evidenced by the blue glow encompassing the name tags above their mechs' heads, came together in a large holding area. One impressive-looking flying mech had a small crown hovering over his name tag. He was the highest-ranked player in their team, and enjoyed commanding privileges as a result. The name's Jackson 645, as you can read. I'm too lazy to form a plan, so you can do whatever you want to do. It's not as if you're kids. Janet and Melinda both shook their heads. Just because most of the players in the Platinum League were professional pilots in the real universe, didn't mean that leadership was unnecessary to win in the game. But it was usually difficult for 50 complete strangers to agree to a single person's ideas, so nobody really bothered to take over the vacuum in leadership, so with an awkward silence, the 50 pilots waited silently in their mechs until the holding area opened up a ramp. It turned out they waited in a massive transport ship. The lightest mechs already sprinted out the exit as soon as possible, leaving the slower medium mechs up next. Melinda and her Mark Antony and Janet piloting some kind of medium cannon-wielding mech both exited in the next batch, stepping foot into a muddy, cratered battlefield. Looks like it's Mud Planet. Hooray! Janet cheered without a hint of celebration. It's going to be tough to hold a firm footing with all the wet soil. At least the bomb craters are able to provide some form of cover. As if aware that running from one side of the battlefield to the other side posed many risks, their team stayed in place and started to entrench their positions. The enemy team must be doing the same as well. Only their light mechs have gone ahead, their nimble legs and adept piloting avoiding much of the hazards the muddy terrain posed, a scout on their team reported back in the team-wide voice channel. Enemy position spotted. They are backed against a small mountain. Impassable by medium mechs and heavier. My judgment is that they're in it for the long haul. A series of groans escaped from many of the other pilots. While they had been dumped into a muddy flat ground that offered no geographic advantages, the enemy team lucked out and got deposited right next to a defensive position. We can't out-turtle them, so let's not bother. Jackson 645 said unwillingly. I'm going to fly around and see how tall this mountain is. I might be able to snipe them from the top. Thus, the nominal leader of the team left their starting position with a small crowd of other flying mechs following behind. Melinda furrowed her brow. By taking away all their flyers, the ground mechs became vulnerable to aerial harassment. Spread out or advance together. The terrain's not bad enough to force us to spread out. A heavy mech pilot said, worried about getting ambushed from the flanks. Let's not thin ourselves out too much and let the enemy pick some easy bargains. I agree. We've got a large number of heavies, so let's escort them to the front line. Halfway to the front line, the plotting mechs encountered an ambush. A deluge of long-ranged missiles rained down from the sky with the wrath of a god. Incoming. Dive for cover. God damn it, are our scouts sleeping? The missiles accurately focused on two of their heavy mechs, bombarding them with so many explosions that only a couple of burning parts were left. There's another salvo. We can't do shit here. Let's run back. You retard, they're just going to keep shredding us with missiles if we turn back. There's no cover between here and our starting point. The only way we can survive is if we advance. As another heavy mech got torn apart while another dodged in the nick of time, the team's channel devolved into chaos. Indignant at the inaction, Melinda felt her temper rise. She piloted her mech forward and banged her tower shield against the hull of a skittery heavy spider mech. The noise deafened the arguments. Look boys, our flyers are gone and our light mechs are asleep. We'll never get rid of the target locks on our mechs, so what's the point of running? I plan to charge at the enemy. Who is with me? Silence prevailed in the interlude between missile launches. The Mark Antony banged its mace against the side of its heavy shield, letting the clanging shake their minds awake. I asked, who is with me? Now that everyone on the team turned to Melinda, they began to notice the mech's unusual appearance. It had an aggressive build, carrying a stylized tower shield and a bulky mace. The red vapor helmet crest lent the mech an ancient, authoritative air, as if they were facing a martial general instead of just another mech. Who is with me? Who is with me? Who is with me? Janet stepped forward with her mech. I am, taking the opportunity to push the rest of her team into something other than sitting ducks. Melinda turned around and led Janet forward. Follow me if you want to win. As if pulled by inertia, most of the medium mechs followed the strange black and red mech. The heavies struggled to follow in their footsteps. Soon enough, their entire team approached the enemy team's position like a wave crashing against a cliff. Lacking any fear, Melinda kept her bulky shield in front and focused her eyes for other ambushes. Her blood pumped faster as she relished the upcoming clash. Chapter 25, Wartorn Instance. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The noise of battle echoed all around her as missiles kept raining down in salvos. Only now the blue team started to employ countermeasures. The medium mechs kept zigzagging while the heavies used their prodigious firepower to strike the missiles down. Melinda and Janet skillfully navigated forward. They dipped into many craters to spoil line of sight and hide behind cover in case snipers aimed at them. Though not high-powered weapons aimed at them, they received sporadic rifle fire from their entrenched opponents. Melinda resolutely shielded Janet from incoming fire with her shield. Their team's light mechs must be engaging the enemy scouts by now. Melinda noted as the missile fire stopped landing with unerring accuracy. Spoiled by their ECMs, the deadly payload sprayed down in a wider spread, damaging many mechs but not to the point of wrecking them completely. What are Jackson and his flyers up to? Janet whined as she felt useless trudging behind Melinda's shield. Her cannon mech had no chance of firing back against an enemy hiding behind makeshift trenches. We're dueling their flyers. Don't bother us. The highest-ranked player in their team spoke before shutting off his comms. Janet, you're too vulnerable if you go any further. Stay here and provide support. Okay. As a trained pilot, she recognized her circumstances, so she nodded without a word. Melinda already scanned the site in front of her. Open terrain. Trenches. A lot of ordnance thrown in our way. I don't think they want us close. No shit, Melly. The only thing I can do is huddle behind a crater hoping they don't send arcing missiles at me. I really picked the wrong mech for this battle. A heavy knight bumped next to Melinda, his shield outweighing even her own. Hey, what's the plan? We charge forward. Once we get in their midst, we can turn this situation around. At the very least we won't be in a one-sided slugfest. You heard her, lads, follow us. The knight-type mech yelled as he raised his hammer in the sky and lumbered forward. Melinda overtook the heavy mech and kept her shield squarely in front. She checked her sensors to see if their team came with them, and when she saw they only kept plodding behind craters, she grew agitated. They were close enough for their rifles to deal a lot of damage. She clanged her mace against her shield so hard it almost dented the edge of the giant slab. Step on it. Keep running and don't stop until you get in their faces. Though she was just one mech of many on the field, somehow her eye-catching form seemed to attract more gazes than normal. Her red crest that made her appear as a valiant warrior inspired others to follow along. Most of them were veterans or expert players after all, so they knew how bad they had fallen into the enemy's kill zone. They put down their apprehensions and followed after the shield bearers at the front, perhaps recognizing that Melinda's mech led them forward. The enemy fire started to slant towards her position. She utilized her mobility as best she could, trying to weave to the sides in order to throw off their aim. Nevertheless, she wasn't as nimble as a light mech, so quite a few cannon shells and laser beams impacted her gigantic shield. One large-caliber cannon round even blasted the right corner of her shield into pieces, almost throwing her off balance. Get on your feet. The heavy knight player yelled as he interposed in front of her, taking the brunt of the volleys while she regained her balance. My shield can still take much more. She pushed past his trudging form and sprinted faster. We're halfway. Just a bit more and we can pound their faces. Melinda felt an overwhelming desire to crash in their faces. She forgot she was playing a game, she forgot that her real life wasn't at stake, she even forgot to take note of the Mark Antony in order to write a report. No, the only thing in her mind was to bull through their firepower. Her HRF-plated shield started to crack from all the ballistic impacts she received. The laser beams exacerbated the damage by melting the cracks wider. The shield was thick, but eventually the fact that it was made out of inferior metals and received a deluge of firepower couldn't prevent the bottom half from cracking away. Fuck, that the loss of that section threw her off balance, and some sharp-eyed shooters immediately lowered their aim, hitting her legs. She could manage the laser fire, but the heavier cannon shells further threw her off balance. Only through skillful piloting did she manage to stumble past the initial seconds. After she regained her balance, she charged forward and closed in on the enemy trenches. She raised her other arm and held up her mace. Bash their heads! Ragged war cries escaped the throats of the other players in their team as they finally closed the distance. They lost 9 mechs throughout the run, but they finally made it to the trenches where the enemy's ranged superiority ceased to offer a decisive advantage. The enemy team possessed a clear lack of close-ranged fighters. However, a heavy striker appeared before Melinda and fired his oversized shotgun at her approaching form. "I can still take it," Melinda said with gritted conviction as she felt her tattered shield fall into pieces. She flung the remainder at the shotgun mech, causing it to flinch for a split second. Her mech's raised arm began to fall, allowing the mace to travel in a dangerous downward arc towards the enemy's head. The heavy striker's shotgun crunched as Melinda feinted her attack, successfully deceiving her opponent as she slipped her mace further downwards and cracked his main weapon. However, the lunging strike left her open to a counter-attack, an opportunity the heavy striker took as it raised both its arms. The glowing hot holes on top of the wrists spewed a gout of flame as searing as a spaceship's engine exhaust. Melinda awkwardly rolled away, throwing mud and burning liquids in every direction. Just as the striker adjusted its aim, a barrage of cannon shells impacted its torso, pushing it back and spoiling its attempts to take its opponent out. "Thanks, Janet." "You're welcome." Before the other mechs in the trench ganged up on her, Melinda was determined to finish off the striker. She got into its face and smashed the mace against its left wrist, disabling the flamethrower. Still moving forward, she used her free hand to grab the mech's other arm, keeping it from turning the remaining flamethrower in her direction. She then bashed her mace against the enemy mech's face to disrupt its main sensors before bashing lower in order to disorient the pilot sitting in the cockpit. The heavy striker's armor largely held against her mace, but the amount of force she was putting in strained the pilot to the point of almost passing out. The shock waves passing through the armor could be deadly in itself once it gained a certain level of strength. Sure that she knocked out the pilot, Melinda dropped the unresponsive heavy and turned to face a pair of medium laser riflemen. They had qualms about firing at her when she stuck close to their ally, but its defeat left them with a clear line of fire. As she stormed over, Melinda raised her own fists and charged up the power of her laser cannons. The 3 exchanged laser volleys. Both sides tuned up their weapons so the damage they all took caused a couple of systems to malfunction. Nevertheless, Melinda remained steadfast, closing the range until she got into melee range. The 2 riflemen discarded their rifles and unsheathed their combat knives, but before they could do anything, Melinda shoulder bashed one mech while pounding her mace against the other mech's grip, redirecting its path. The mech that received the bash rolled onto its back, its knife only leaving a deep groove off the Mark Antony's thick front torso. It tried to retrieve a pistol to fire at her, but before it could do so her heavy knight teammate finally reached the trench with an awe-inspiring jump that landed onto the fallen mech's leg, the many tons of weight crushing them into broken parts. The enemy mech was finished. Melinda already turned her attention to the other rifleman, who tried to scamper away to higher ground. Melinda didn't let off her prey, pouncing forward in order to beat the fleeing mech with her now battered and misshapen mace. "Die!" she screamed as she crunched the mech's back plates into deformity. She took advantage of the gap she created by firing the lasers with her other wrist, burning or melting tons of critical components. Her team was about to overrun the enemy team, but a barrage of shells and lasers rained down from above. The unexpected attacks threw Team Blue for a loop, taking the wind out of their frenzied assault. Team Red used the opportunity to retreat. So much for the top-ranked player in our team. Fucking lone wolf. Go back to arena if you want to play hero. With no flyers left on the blue team, their opponents enjoyed complete air superiority. The red team's flyers flew so nimbly that it would take a lot of trouble shooting them down. It was better to chase the ground pounders and finish them off first. Don't let the runners off. Melinda yelled as she charged forward even as her mech received a couple of dents from the aerial assault. With a frustrated growl, she primed her shoulder launchers. With the amount of firepower the flyers were throwing in their way, she had little trouble establishing target locks. She instantly dumped her entire payload into the air. Not even looking at whether they reached their targets, Melinda detached the launchers from her shoulders, freeing up more weight, suppressing their air power. Janet spoke over the channel as their team's anti-air started to support the team from the rear. Tracer fire from rapid-fire cannons streaked through the air while volleys of missiles tracked the elusive figures trying to cause havoc. Unfortunately for them, the enemy successfully regrouped to a second line, where a reserve of fresh mechs took over from their battered teammates. The fresh round of volleys suppressed the blue team's advance. "What are you guys standing for? Get going!" Melinda yelled as she spurred her own mech forward. They raised her half-wrecked mace with one arm while blasting the enemy positions with laser fire with her other arm. When the laser cannons overheated from the rapid firing, she threw her mace to her other hand and fired with the other wrist cannon. The Mark Antony always carried heavier armor than usual among medium weights, but the mech's armor started to show some cracks. Her left eye blew apart while her reactor's power generation reduced by a third. Nevertheless, she still managed to haul her mech to the second line with both wrist cannons blazing with excessive heat. The enemy was ready for her. A sword wielder closed in while firing a ballistic pistol. The heavy bullets impacted her mech's damaged chest, exacerbating the damage and causing her to stagger a little. By the time the sword wielder closed in, his weapon already aimed at the gaps in the armor, Melinda threw her damaged mace at the approaching enemy. The weapon bounced off the mech, startling it and slowing down its charge. Melinda took advantage of the pause to bounce backwards while firing her already stressed laser cannons. The lasers melted the sword wielder's frame here and there, achieving little effect due to the poor accuracy of the shots on the move. "There!" she yelled in triumph as she picked up a sword from a fallen mech. With a weapon in hand, she met the enemy mech's second charge. With some ingenious maneuvering, she deftly avoided the charge while parrying the opponent's blade. At the same time, she extended a leg to trip the mech and succeeded. The mech sprawled in the muddy soil as gravity and momentum did their work. "Who else?" she yelled in the public channel as exulting in her triumph. "Is this the red team's best? Your opponent is me." A grizzled voice called out as a sword down struck from the air. A damaged medium flyer slammed down with its entire weight supporting the sword. Having received the alert from her damaged but functional sensors, Melinda barely managed to dodge to the side, unfortunately leaving her mech's left arm and a part of the shoulder behind. Despite the catastrophic damage, the Mark Antony still maintained integrity, not having suffered too much loss in performance except for the missing limb. "So you must be the one who tore our flyers apart," Melinda noted as she scrambled to perform whatever damage control she could from her sparking cockpit. "I did my job," the flyer replied as he detached the damaged wings from his mech's back. "Too bad my teammates on the ground are worthless. I'll just have to sweep you all myself, starting with you and your morale-raising antics. You must think highly of me if you think I'm able to keep this bunch in shape. It also helps that you're damaged. I'm here to finish you off." Without any other exchange of words, the two clashed against each other, sword to sword. The flyer possessed most of the advantages. His mech was nimbler and still possessed both arms. The pilot also revealed polished sword skills that could only have achieved this state through constant battles. The ex-flyer aggressively sought to tear the Mark Antony into pieces. It took all Melinda had focusing on defense and firing the occasional wrist laser to hold back the onslaught. The smart play here was to wait until Janet or some other mechs came by to lend a hand. "I can't hold on." Melinda gritted her teeth as she admitted it. She threw away all her reservations and threw her mech forward. The ace pilot reacted far too quickly, as if already expecting such an action. Melinda almost couldn't reach her opponent, so she exerted the utmost of her piloting skill and jumped her hefty mech forwards. The impulsive action caused her to impale her mech onto the enemy's sword. Nevertheless, she managed to redirect the sword strike into stabbing the less important components such as the energy cells. This left Melinda's remaining arm free to chop straight down. The first chop split the flyer's head in half. The second slash cut through the enemy's thinner armor and slashed the engines into a mess, immobilizing the mech. The third stab ran straight through the torso and out the back. Red blood faintly coated the sword as she had deliberately aimed at the enemy's cockpit. With a tired sigh she surveyed the battle. With most of the enemy flyers suppressed, the battle between the ground mechs determined victory and defeat. Team Red obtained a decisive advantage at the start by disabling many mechs at long range. Team Blue evidently had the advantage in close-quarters combat, and dished out plenty of payback. Did we win? Not a lot of mechs remained. Shortly after, only one remaining mech from Team Red still stood on its feet. Melinda kept back as support, only firing her overstressed wrist cannon whenever an opening presented. A high-powered cannon shell ripped apart a damaged foot, causing the enemy mech to tumble for a bit. The mechs fending it off now pounced at it like it was a bowl of caviar. The last of the red team didn't make it through the dismemberment. Team Blue has won the match. Melinda rubbed her eyes as she came down from the high. Is the game always this intense? I enjoyed this match way more than I thought. Despite its ragged state, the Mark Antony performed well for a discounted 5-star mech. Even in its damaged state and missing an arm, the mech still exuded dominance, especially now that it left the battlefield. It was as if feeding the machine with the flesh and blood of its enemies allowed such a machine to grow. That's just nonsense. Melinda shook her head. I don't know how VES did it, but I actually want to hop back in and queue for another match. Janet's voice popped up from their private channel. You were awesome. As Janet babbled in the many ways Melinda pounded her opponents into pieces, the girl in question still digested the previous battle. I don't know why, but the game has grown more realistic. I've been affected by the realism of this game. Chapter 26, Objective. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Now that Melinda got out of the high of super-realistic combat, she remembered why she stepped into the simulator in the first place. This mech, the specs aren't bad. It's a pity about the armor. It doesn't hold up in a large melee. The shield's also far too heavy for the scant amount of protection it's offering. Still, when she saw how few gold she had to spend to repair her mech and replace her shield, she smiled. The total amount she lost paled in comparison to the amount of gold she earned from performing well in that last match. She even received the coveted MVP award. The game really went all out in retaining its older customer base with these tricks. Janet whistled her appreciation as she read the score list. Damn Melly, you went to town on them. You've personally disabled 4 mechs. Yeah, and pretty much wrecked my entire mech in the process. At least I won't cry about the repair bill. You wanna go for another match? Yeah. I need to get familiar with this mech. My little cousin did a good job with this machine. That's for sure. If your new mech is fully equipped with the HRF, then he has my respect. Half the red team fired potshots at you and you still made it through the end. I didn't know you were so gutsy for leading the charge. I got caught up in the moment, I guess. She didn't know what made her enjoy piloting the Mark Antony so much. For a 5-star mech, its specs were mediocre and it clearly tried to do too many things at once. Yet when she hopped into its cockpit, she felt as if she embodied a war god ready to wipe out heretics. Its dark paint scheme and blazing red shield brought out the urge to go on the offensive. Janet, do you think the game's become more realistic? I hardly noticed I was playing in a simulator. Duh, that's because you're playing with the Planetary Guard's best simulator pods. They simulate movement and impacts with ship-grade artificial gravity. Maybe that was it. The simulator pods from the Game Center don't go that far in providing the most realistic experience. The simulation pods of the Guard might not be the best in the galaxy, but they still provided excellent training opportunities. The two queued together in another Wartorn instance. This one was the map of the day, a 200v200 featuring a massive battleground with multiple objectives to capture or destroy. Matches could last up to 2 hours if both sides were evenly matched. The matchmaking took a few minutes to gather enough players. Once it finished matching players, their team entered another lobby. This time Melinda ignored the posturing and smack talk between her more dominant team members. Trying to assert leadership of a group of 50 pilots was barely doable, but it almost couldn't be done with 200 unless you were famous. Let's stay on the defensive this time. I want this mech to last a little longer this time. How about the forward depot? We can refill our ammo and energy cells there if we need any, which you sorely do if I recall your mech's energy expenditure. As the match started, the mass of mechs left the giant hangar and entered an urban combat environment. Modeled after an old Terran historically preserved city, most of the structures were only a couple of stories high. Enough to cover mechs at ground level, but not enough to provide significant protection if enemies shot at them from the air. All 200 mechs in their team split up as they attended to their chosen objectives. Some players intended to assault a remote location, while others planned to defend a spot to the last mech. Melinda and Janet were joined by a gaggle of random mechs as they reached a small forward depot that represented one of the secondary objectives in the game. Our main win condition is to conquer the city hall, while the enemy team has to take over our military HQ. The asymmetric conditions forced the two teams to adopt different strategies. The military HQ offered better repair and resupply, while the city hall possessed better active defenses. It encouraged the blue team to attack and the red team to defend. However, if the red team just kept turtling behind their walls, they'd run out of ammunition, energy cells and other resources. So the fight for the secondary objectives prevailed at the start of the match. When they reached the bunker-like depot, the group of mechs spread out to form an effective defense in each direction. They needed no discussion to decide where they'd be best employed. Janet brought her cannon mech to a reinforced firing position just within the bunker. She had a great forward view while being completely protected from aerial attacks. The first sounds of combat already rang out further in the distance. Scouts from both teams encountered each other, leading to limited skirmishes. A distressed light mech with a missing head suddenly barged the bunker's perimeter. Only its IFF or identification system prevented it from being blasted to pieces. They're coming. 8 mechs. Mediums and lights. The light mech disappeared before providing greater detail. Seeing that no heavy mech had joined their defense, likely due to the depot being situated too far forward, Melinda readied her shield and held her other arm ready to fire laser blasts. The missiles came first. An arcing volley of missiles flew from a couple of blocks away and splashed against the surface of the depot, damaging its reinforced exterior. The second volley that came after got shot down by their team's anti-air. Subsequent missiles kept getting intercepted. While half of their team preoccupied themselves in shooting down the missiles, a couple of townhouses split into pieces as a group of 5 melee mechs burst through. Their guns blazed as they focused their firepower on a rifleman. The structure it hid behind got smashed to pieces, allowing the enemy mechs a clear line of fire to heavily damage the rifleman. Melinda kept her Mark Antony in the open, trying to offer an alternative target to the attackers. Unfortunately, they played it smart, keeping their attention focused on the more vulnerable ranged mechs. "Hey! Over here, buddy!" she indignantly called, and charged towards their position while firing half her missile complement. The projectile successfully diverted the attention of one of the medium strikers, who activated its head-mounted rapid-fire machine guns to shoot down the missiles one by one. Nevertheless, Melinda made it through halfway by that time and her wrist laser kept pelting the striker, dealing moderate but sporadic damage due to the spread of her shots. The striker retaliated with a barrage of shotgun fire, the pellets stripping the front layers of her shield. Nevertheless, her shield held up against the attacks which could easily shred a light mech to pieces. Melinda stopped firing her lasers. Instead, she raised the mace in her mech's grip and prepared to smash it down against the opposing mech's face. The striker responded by activating a wicked-looking bayonet on his shotgun. As her mace came down, the striker dodged the telegraphed attack and thrust with its bayonet. Grinning, Melinda rotated the torso of her mech, causing her unbalanced mech to haul its shield in an angle that neatly deflected the bayonet attack in time. She then leaned her mech's entire weight against the shield, pushing the striker off balance with its weapon extended. A kick caused the shotgun to fly away, while the mace came around to smack viciously against the striker's face, crushing half its head. A few further whacks on the disoriented mech caused its cockpit to cave in, squishing the pilot into meat paste. Her other teammates had the attackers well in hand by now. Melinda and another fellow striker kept the 4 remaining mechs to stall, leaving them vulnerable to medium and long-ranged fire from Janet and her fellow mechs. The opponents left another fallen mech behind before fleeing back to their lines. The reprieve bought some time for them to get a grip on how their team fared in other locations. Forward depot is secure. Fended off a small raid. The fucking communications center is heavily entrenched. We ain't gonna capture a thing with a squad of heavies ready to rain missiles and cannon shells down on us. We were beaten back at the evacuation shelter. They took complete control of the civilians there. They're loading hostages. I can't make out which kind. The red team is up to something. If they're defending the satellites while hauling hostages, then they must be calling in reinforcements. Shit. We gotta stop them before they call in something nasty. Yeah, go ahead. Unless we divert at least 50 mechs to the comm center, we're not going to dislodge them from their cozy position. Well, they're going to win if we're sitting around. Relax. They've diverted so many mechs that the power plant is less secure. Once we take it over, we can pull the plug and say goodbye to all of their fixed defenses. Melinda nodded as she understood why there hadn't been a second wave of attackers. She felt agitated at the lack of heads to bash in. Her mech wasn't made to sit around idly. Janet, let's resupply and go. Most of the mechs present at the forward depot used its ample supplies to refill their energy cells and ammunition. If an enemy came to attack, they'd be highly vulnerable. Luckily, no one came, and Melinda managed to refill her missile launchers and a couple of spent energy cells. They decided to approach the communications satellites, which was currently under sporadic assault by their fellow team members. Missiles and other ordnance shot at the massive structures. However, most of the physical projectiles got shot down, while the lasers only caused surface burns against the surprisingly resilient antennas. It's useless trying to melt those antennas. They're built to last against a siege. One experienced pilot spoke over the comm: if we want to deny them the comms, we've got to destroy the control centers or backup power generators. We need to get close somehow. It's too risky to go in by air or at ground level. Is there an underground access point on this map? There are, but our enemies have mechs holed up behind a lot of barricades. It's going to be hell pushing through any of the tunnels. We've got no choice. Melinda said, already having a bad feeling about this situation. Unless you want to keep dicking around trying to melt all the antennas with your lasers, we've got to do something to disrupt whatever they're up to. Let's meet up to the north access point. Melinda left Janet behind. Her cannons wouldn't be useful in the tight confines of the underground. While Janet and her cannoneer stayed behind in order to provide supporting fire, Melinda gathered a ragtag bunch of mechs with the same thing in mind and entered the tunnel to the north of the comm center, the dark environment only lit up with red emergency lights, too dim to provide effective lighting. Melinda and the dozen other mechs switched their sensor mode from optical to whatever night or dark vision they possessed. Their scout went ahead at a faster but less noisy stride, disappearing for several minutes before sending back his observations. 6 light and medium mechs spotted at the juncture ahead. It's a warning post. They're going to make a run for it as soon as we appear. We're not built for stealth. A rifleman noted. Let's focus on storming half of them while letting the rest go. It's gonna suck if they get off a warning, but I don't think we have any better solutions. Sounds alright to me. Okay. Let me go in front. Melinda insisted despite the presence of several light mechs in their midst. I might not be as fast, but I'm the only one with a big-ass shield. Fine by us. One of the light mech pilots spoke. You might stand a decent chance surviving their booby traps if they set up any. With a short deployment plan set up, they barged through the tunnels and into a small open storage area. A few empty containers stood in the way between them and the startled enemy mechs. Some had evidently been playing cards or something, as they responded to the intrusion half a second slower than normal. Keeping her shield in front, Melinda used her other arm to blast a few lasers at a missile-carrying mech. She managed to score a couple of hits at the same place, melting one of its launchers. Sporadic fire from her teammates caused the launcher module to take further damage, until a small shell caused the entire thing to detonate all of its missiles. The massive chain of explosions wrecked the missiler and disrupted the enemy's formation. A few of the nimbler mechs dodged the incoming fire and successfully slipped away. However, the same couldn't be said for the medium mechs. Slower and easier to hit, Melinda's allies shot at their legs to disrupt their posture and prevent them from gaining speed. They eventually reached the outnumbered enemies, though everyone used their night vision. The eerie red glow of the Mark Antony's eyes gave the dark mech a grim facade. The vapor crest at the top of its head caused the medium mech in front of her to quail. Nevertheless, the pilot was a Platinum Leaguer, and he wasn't resigned to death. The enemy mech fired off an entire salvo of short-ranged missiles that blew back the Mark Antony, yet still the shield held, though with half of its layers gone. "You're going to pay for that," she yelled and dove back in to bash the mech into a battered pile of components. The other mechs finished off the remaining enemies. "Let's move on." As they reached the end of the tunnel, they met with a stream of cannon fire. One of Melinda's teammates got hit in the leg, severely damaging his mech's mobility. "Shit! My left leg's a goner. Make way!" Melinda yelled and surged at the front to hold her shield over the fallen mech. "Someone drag his ass behind cover. What do we do now? We haven't got enough firepower to contend against their cannons. Did you forget our objective? Push through no matter the cost." Without waiting for a reply, Melinda stepped forward and bravely took the lead. The other mechs hesitated before deciding that they didn't have another opportunity. They followed with gusto. Those with ranged weapons fired while on the run, causing very little damage to the cannoneers down the tunnel, but it did force them to keep their heads behind cover. As Melinda kept up her run, her mech continued to get hammered by shock waves as its shield received constant cannon impacts. It was tough for her to bowl through the sheer amount of kinetic energy thrown in her way, but the adverse circumstances only made her heart pump faster. "That's it. Keep firing on me. My mech can take the punishment." The shield started to lose its square shape as the ends got shot off. Some of the shells even exploded against her armor, causing several cracks. Still, she successfully closed the distance before the cannons could do worse. With her halved shield, she bashed one enemy mech aside while her mace pounded against the cannon of another enemy, disabling the weapon. Her opponent retaliated by throwing the useless weapon towards her, causing her to falter in her follow-up. The mech used the gap to unsheath the sword behind its back. By the time the sword slashed down at her, Melinda managed to regain enough balance to block the strike with her shield, causing it to split apart. Angry at the loss of her shield, she fired a couple of quick laser blasts before pouncing aggressively with her mace. The lasers distracted the mech long enough for her mace to disable the enemy mech's sword arm. Her subsequent strike successfully wrecked its four limbs. The narrow confines and the barricades made it difficult for both sides to see how the battle progressed. Nevertheless, Melinda felt confident her team had the upper hand. She conveniently scavenged her fallen opponent's sword before hunting her next victim. That was until a salvo of long-ranged missiles streaked from the dark. Melinda hastily jumped back and picked the recently disabled mech. Its IFF systems was still operating, so most of the missiles turned at the last second to acquire other targets or explode against the walls of the tunnel. She dropped the half-dead mech once the missiles had been spent. "That was a neat trick." A surprisingly young voice echoed from the tunnel. "But I'm afraid that's where your luck will end." The darkness made way for a brightly colored mech. Its white exterior showed no marks, and even its shield looked pristine. The tall and majestic-looking mech had held back so far, keeping it and a small squad holed up at the exit to the surface. "Well shit," Melinda said, noting how her shield was gone and her armor looked cracked and scorched. "You're running the stock model?" "Indeed I am," the pilot replied conceitedly. I have no tricks. I find the original to be a pleasure to pilot, even in reality. You could say that I'm a fan. Just so you know, there's one thing I hate. And that is? Melinda idly asked as she grimly readied herself for perhaps the toughest fight with her new mech. I hate imposters. The sparkling white Caesar Augustus thundered forward with its kite shield in front and its other arm blasting an even more powerful salvo of lasers. Melinda growled as she sidestepped the assault and retaliated with firing the cannons on both her wrists. She used her superior mobility and all the piloting skill she possessed to keep the damage to a minimum. I'm not afraid of you. Bring it on. Chapter 27, Absolute Power. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In an unspoken agreement, the reinforcements that came with the Caesar Augustus busied themselves with fending off Melinda's allies. That's a nice mech you got there. Shame about the armor though. It's the Mark Antony, designed by someone I know. It's supposed to be a more affordable alternative to what you're riding. The Caesar Augustus pilot let out a contemptuous snort. The mere thought of cheapening any of this frame's components is abhorrent. It goes against everything this august mech stands for. You and your friend have no idea how much you sullied its grandeur. Like an unstoppable tide, the Caesar Augustus kept closing the distance as it exchanged laser blasts. Melinda's laser cannons were running hot, but the only thing she managed to achieve was to heat up the top layers of her opponent's shield, causing only a fraction of its mass to melt. Its defensive power was a testament to National Aeromotive's heat absorption research. It's useless. Face the inevitability. You talk too much. Melinda yelled as she abandoned her laser fire for a close-in approach. Like a nimble gorilla she threw her mech forward while juking as much shots as she could. The Mark Antony strained against the sudden turns even as the incoming fire heated up a lot of portions of her mech. It made the Mark Antony seem like a demon from hell, with its dark armor, glowing red spots and the ever-present water vapor leaking from the crest of its head. That's a funny gimmick, the Roman helmet design. But I'm afraid you're going to lose it when I hack off your head. The Caesar Augustus came into melee range, but despite the pilot's words the Augustus continued to charge forward like a train. Melinda only belatedly dodged to the side, suffering a glancing blow from the Augustus' quick slash. The two came together again and engaged in a furious exchange of blows interspersed with opportunistic laser blasts. The Augustus' shield was virtually indestructible as Melinda's dual weapons lacked sufficient weight or sharpness. The white sword struck with measured, disciplined strikes that followed a mysterious pattern. It successfully held Melinda at bay. The pilot of the Caesar Augustus must be an elite. His formal piloting skill overwhelmed her own as he moved the Augustus fluently like it was his own body. From his sword style to his movement pattern, everything the pilot did only put Melinda in a tougher position. Give up. I've seen what your mech is made of. You're an inferior copy. Shut up. Melinda replied as sweat poured down her face. She tried her best to hang on, but the opponent kept chipping away at the HRF plating that kept her mech protected. I can understand why you pilot such garbage. After all, if you don't have the money, you'll never pilot a mech as magnificent as the Caesar Augustus in your lifetime. Not everything can be measured with money. She hissed as she surged forward, risking a deadly stab which she parried with her borrowed sword. Her weapon cracked and broke in half, but it succeeded in taking the wind out of the strike. Her mace already pounced from above, the heavy rounded end traveling in a straight arc towards the Augustus' head. The enemy pilot hastily raised his shield, bouncing the mace back with a heavy vibration. What will you do now without a sword? This. Melinda dropped the broken sword and used her wrist to fire a couple of point-blank laser blasts right in the eyes. While most of the head was able to endure the heat, the main sensors and the delicate components buried deeper in the head were not so lucky. The enemy pilot screamed as he lost his primary vision. He performed a reflexive bash with his shield that pushed the Mark Antony back. She stepped backwards along with the push, and started to slink sideways in order to take advantage of the fact the Augustus now relied on its secondary sensors. You think you've blinded me? You're wrong. Surprisingly, the Augustus shifted adeptly in Melinda's direction. Perhaps wary of another point-blank surprise, the Augustus with its melted head kept its distance while firing its wrist laser. The Mark Antony spent its energy at a fast rate trying to dodge the shots. "I've been lenient to you so far. I didn't expect you to scorn my face. Very well, let me show you the real power of the First Emperor." That the Augustus dropped its shield, relinquishing much of its defensive advantage over the Mark Antony. Nevertheless, the Augustus moved forward with renewed grace. The enhanced speed alarmed Melinda, and it took all she had to dodge the Augustus' masterful sword stroke. The follow-up strikes chipped away at the Mark Antony's exterior, shaving off several portions of its arm and torso armor. Melinda pushed down her panic and kept composed as she danced around with her mech. As each second passed, she felt her conscious mind grow more intense. The Mark Antony's dark form echoed her every thought, allowing her to avoid the Augustus' swords repeatedly. Even in the instances where she couldn't avoid damage, she exerted her utmost to let the sword strike her mech's best armored sections. "All you can do is run like a cockroach and jump like a monkey," the pilot bellowed, frustrated at the continual chase. "That's all a cheap whore riding a cheap imitation like you can do. You'll never be able to match me and my mech's brilliance." That an irrational spike of fury invaded Melinda's thoughts. All her formal guard training warned her not to lose her composure. Having spent a lot of time mediating between hotheads piloting multi-ton war machines, she was well aware of the dangers of letting your anger get the better of your decision-making. The Mark Antony, huh? I suppose you're not familiar with ancient Terran history. You see, way back then, Augustus defeated Mark Antony repeatedly. And now, history will repeat itself. Your cheap joke of a mech will never be as worthy as mine. None of her reservations remained. Indignant at being looked down at, she willingly embraced her anger and howled. The ferocious call stuttered the young pilot's attack, causing him to present an unforgivable gap in his assault. Melinda struck out with her mace with the limits of her mech's capacity, channeling the kinetic energy of her mech's legs, its rotating torso and its entire arm in a single devastating swipe that landed accurately against the Augustus' sword grip. The fingers crunched as the impact of an entire mech's momentum couldn't be stopped by such delicate limbs. The middle and ring fingers even separated entirely. Despite the critical damage, the Augustus was nimble enough to throw its sword to its other hand. Once the Augustus regained its weapon, the Mark Antony would suffer as it overextended itself severely in its last attack. Melinda's eyes sharpened as she used the brief moment to do something unorthodox. She engaged the emergency release catches that kept the Mark Antony's shoulder launchers attached to its armor. Using the remnants of her mech's forward momentum, she caused her mech to bodily fling the launchers at the gobsmacked Augustus. No matter how much money you have, you can't spend your way to victory. Melinda grinned as she waved goodbye with her mech's free hand. She activated the overrides that caused all the missiles to explode their payloads at once. Twin suns appeared in their midst, blasting the Mark Antony backwards. The explosion further cracked her mech's armor, but she was able to get it to stay on its feet. As the smoke and fire cleared, the Caesar Augustus looked much sorrier than before. Its armor surprisingly only sported a few cracks and craters despite suffering 2 concentrated magazine detonations. Unfortunately, even if its armor retained much of its effectiveness, the more delicate components underneath suffered worse. The amalgamated explosions radiated the combined shock waves of a full salvo of missiles. Worse, the propellants of the missiles hadn't been expended at all, so they blew up all at once as well, adding an incinerating quality to the explosions that left the bedraggled Augustus half-burning in mechanical agony. What is this? I can't move my mech," the distressed young man said as he kept trying to take control over his mech's twitching limbs. The Augustus is only mortal," Melinda interjected as she guided her mech's foot to crunch the other hand of her opponent's mech into scrap. The Mark Antony ominously leaned over, bringing its menacing and battle-scarred face close to the Augustus' half-smashed and half-burned face. "You're not invincible inside that expensive toy of yours. At least I'm able to afford one in the real universe. You'll get your ass whipped just the same," Melinda noted, then bashed her mace against the Augustus' torso. The cracks expanded, but the armor surprisingly held up against the blunt force trauma she frenziedly inflicted. By the time her mace broke off from the abuse, the enemy pilot's body had long since fallen apart from the excessive shock impacts. Tossing the useless handle away, Melinda walked over and picked up the fallen mech's virtually pristine sword and shield. "Thanks for letting me borrow this, buddy." She swept her gaze at the confused melee around her. Though her duel with the Caesar Augustus expended much out of her mech, it lasted only around 2 minutes. Victory and defeat hadn't been decided yet, but Melinda already pounced at the nearest enemy mech from the flanks. The opponent wasn't able to keep its attention in 2 directions at once, and lost its lower leg to a cruel slice of Melinda's new sword. "This weapon's much better than I thought," she pleasingly muttered, though she missed the crunchy feel of her mace. With Melinda's help, she freed up her preoccupied teammates, leaving them free to help out the others in turn. This caused the scales of battle to tip in their favor rapidly, leading the enemy to a solid rout as their remnants retreated up to the surface. The Mark Antony raised its appropriated sword, causing the survivors to cheer in victory. Despite not having any advantage in the quality of her mech or her league ranking, she still managed to exude the quality of a leader. Most of the mechs who fought alongside of her were willing to follow her directions. Pleased at the deference she enjoyed, Melinda lowered the sword until it pointed towards the exit. "We have a base to wreck. Let's go." That the group of mechs squeezed out of the exit and finally reached the surface. Most of the defenders were still stuck guarding against outside attackers, but some of them had already been alerted to the intrusion. "Show me where their control center is located." 6 o'clock, the dome by the tower-like structure. "All right, boys and girls, we've got only one thing left before we can call it a day. To the control center." Despite the many mechs that turned around to take care of the threat that popped up in their midst, the invaders had initiative on their side and they only needed a short time to reach the control center. The hard-shelled dome protected it against all kinds of ordnance, but when Melinda crashed the lower edge of her kite shield against the surface, it cracked and started to cave in. Some of the other mechs with melee weapons joined in the fun while the rest fended off the approaching defenders. "We can't hold out much longer. Keep it up. We just need a little more time." That the Mark Antony's last 3 shield attacks succeeded in prying open a hole. A light mech with a flamethrower immediately went to her side and fired off a lethally hot stream of flame that incinerated all of the control center's personnel and computers. Melinda mentally bathed in their screams, feeling gratified that they accomplished their objective. Melinda. You might not celebrate so soon yet. There's a problem." She snapped out of her funk. "What's up, Janet?" "Well, you guys managed to destroy the control center, but not before they called in the first wave of their reinforcements. You better look up in the sky." Her sensors readjusted. She could see a small speck in the sky growing larger. It was an entry pod, allowing mechs to arrive on the surface of a planet with the speed of free fall. The pod grew larger, and larger, and larger, and larger. That's not a normal pod. The pod was way too big to fit a single mech. From the size of it, Melinda estimated the pod could fit in at least 8 to 12 medium mechs, which was difficult to fend off. Only until the pod engaged its boosters to slow down its downward crash did Melinda feel that something was off. Those boosters released so much force that it rattled the entire comm center. It was as if the boosters were working their ass off arresting the fall of something much larger than a bunch of regular mechs. An earthquake-like impact rattled everyone in the vicinity as the pod finally half-crashed in the middle of the base. The ramp of the pod lowered slowly, taking its time until it fully extended. That was until a foot the size of a heavy mech kicked the metal ramp away. The rectangular piece of metal screeched as it bounced off the ground only to crash against the base of an antenna. An apocalyptic mech the size of the guard headquarters main building stepped out of the oversized pod. Each footstep seemed to rumble the footing of the other mechs, leading to a growing unease among the blue team. With its sturdy legs, barreled torso and a pair of weapon-encrusted arms, the metal monstrosity stretched the definition of mech. "It's a juggernaut." Janet whispered. In the history of mech development, there was no hard rule that set the size and weight of the mechs to a specific limit. The current modern adoption of the light, medium and heavy classification was more out of convenience than out of any calculated considerations. The doctrines that followed were what really cemented the classifications in place. The light mech is fast and stays alive by remaining unseen or dodging enemy attacks. They usually act as scouts, saboteurs or flankers. They also make excellent flyers. A medium mech is nimble on its feet and can withstand a limited amount of damage. They are the jack of all trades in the mech world, able to fulfill any role with their unparalleled flexibility. A heavy mech doesn't bother dodging, instead choosing to tank all the attacks coming its way. It is regarded as a tank due to the ease it is able to defend a position or break through enemy lines. An entire industry has sprung up around these three archetypes. The system of developing and licensing interchangeable and modular components came about when different customers demanded they wanted to mount their favorite toys on their favorite mechs. Many advanced components invented these days restricted their use to a single weight class in order to maintain compatibility. But regardless of this thriving ecosystem of mechs and mech parts, there were always some parties that wanted to take a step forwards for themselves. One such moment happened at the new Robarth Empire's introduction of the Juggernaut to the battlefield. The Juggernaut was a mech that had the ability to contend against a low-flying spaceship. Its frame and its countless components weighed as much as a dozen heavy mechs, but was about 100 to 1,000 times more expensive to build. The many technologies that kept such a gargantuan in one piece and prevented it from collapsing under its own weight were very expensive to reproduce. Such a large and heavy mech simply didn't appear to be economical. That never stopped the new Robarthans, though. They painstakingly invested in its development and kept the project under wraps for at least an entire mech generation. Only until they refined the design well enough to be able to operate in hostile planetary environments did they release the first Juggernaut on the battlefield. It left behind a massacre back then. The city it fought in suffered so much damage. The new Robarthans considered the battle could have resulted in less damage if they fired off a couple of illegal tactical nukes. Right now, the Juggernauts were weapons with dubious legal status in human space. Many states hostile to the new Robarth Empire sought to draft a treaty banning such ultra-large mechs. The devastating they could unleash rivaled weapons of mass destruction. In actuality, it would be justified if they were categorized as the newest WMD humans have invented. All of that was of little use to Melinda now, as the Juggernaut finally moved. It raised one of its arms that bristled with gun cannons and pointed in the vague direction of Blue Team's military base. "Oh shit. Get out, Janet. I'm already on it," that the Juggernaut fired, and the entire world turned white. Chapter 28, Preparation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. What happened after that? Ves asked over the comm as he rested on the couch. Lucky curiously tried to paw Melinda's head projected by the comm. The Juggernaut blasted half the walls of the military base apart. It set up a panic in our team. Frankly, the only reason why we lasted so long after the Juggernaut entered the field was because its pilot went drunk with power. He destroyed half his team with all the collateral damage he caused. The two spoke about the performance of the Mark Antony, and how Melinda found it to be a good mech despite its many faults. It doesn't have a good place on the front lines due to its scattered strengths. It's not quite a knight, not quite a striker, and its pitiful launchers don't give the mech a lot of long-ranged firepower. Well, I'm only working with the tools I have. Frankly, if I could replace the mace and shield with something sturdier, I'm sure the mech would perform just as well as the Caesar Augustus. Sadly, that's not an option if I want to keep costs and complexity under control. Ves shook his head. I've anticipated most of the issues you've mentioned, but they're kind of built into the fundamental design of the mech. I'm not aiming to replace the Caesar Augustus. I just want to deliver an affordable variant that can perform well in smaller engagements. Melinda nodded. I'm certainly impressed with the mech. I kind of want to replace my patrol mech with it, but I know the pencil pushers in the guard won't allow such a thing. It doesn't have the endurance. After the conversation ended, Ves put the finishing touches on his second handmade mech and sent it off to be sold in the market. Let's see my progress so far. Status, name, Ves Larkinson, profession, novice mech designer, specializations, none, design points, 235. Attributes, strength, 0.7. Dexterity, 0.7. Endurance, 0.6. Intelligence, 1.2. Creativity, 1. Concentration, 1.2. Neural aptitude, F. Skills, Assembly, Apprentice, 3D Printer Proficiency I, Assembler Proficiency I. Business, Apprentice, Computer Science, Incompetent, Electrical Engineering, Novice, Mathematics, Incompetent, Mechanics, Apprentice, Jury Rigging I, Speed Tuning I. Metallurgy, Apprentice, Metaphysics, Incompetent, Physics, Novice, Lightweight Armor Optimization I, Medium Weight Armor Optimization I. Evaluation, almost reached the standards of an apprentice mech designer. His stats hadn't changed much since the last time he viewed it. His concentration had gained 0.1 points again due to his single-minded focus in mastering the Mark Antony. Besides sleeping, eating, bathroom rituals and taking short breaks to reset his mood, he spent all his time fabricating the Mark Antony. His DP counter remained stubbornly stagnant, further indicating that the sales potential for his Fantasia variants had reached the bottom of the well. Much of his DP came from the 2 Mark Antonys sold so far. They offered much more for a single sale due to their higher value. It doesn't look like my Mark Antony model will catch fire. Ves noted disappointingly. With only a little more than a week left until the YTE, I won't be able to increase my sub-skills or attributes in any meaningful way. While he spent a lot of work designing the Mark Antony then mastering its fabrication process, the things he learned provided marginal help at best when joining the contest. The contest only lasted 1 day, just long enough for mech designers to showcase their skills without boring the audience to a multi-day engineering fest. The day before the main event, the organizers hosted a qualifying round in order to filter out the 8 best contestants. Both events revolved around designing and putting together a functioning mech out of a bunch of parts and a random stripped-down model. It showcased the mech designer's skill in creating new mechs while skipping out the boring part of fabricating the parts from scratch. The old VES without the system probably wouldn't get past the qualifiers. Even with all the additional benefits the system gave him, he might not even be certain he can reach the top 3. I shouldn't be obsessed with trying to reach first place. I have to keep my priorities clear. As long as I can find a single customer for my Mark Antony design, I've already won. The impending interest payment term loomed within a month, which caused VES to bear immense pressure. I stand a much better chance in the contest if I can earn enough DP to buy the Jury Rigging 2 sub-skill before it starts. He already experienced the power of Jury Rigging I. The skill energized with his creativity, allowing him to form unorthodox solutions to complicated technical problems. It did not add any new knowledge, but instead improved his ability to combine the knowledge he already learned into something new. An example would be to strip a laser rifle and turn it onto a shoulder mount. Though such a shoddy modification won't work as well as a purpose-built shoulder weapon, it should work well enough in an emergency. I should get my workshop ready. Ves reminded himself. If all went well, he should be able to find a customer for his new design. He'd have to get his workshop ready and running by the time he got back from the event. First he took a look at his 3D printer. As a fairly old, second-hand model, it lacked the most current technology in fabrication. Ves meticulously went through the settings of the printer, and with the help of his improved knowledge in assembly, added presets that helped fabricate certain parts easier and with less errors. Then, he looked at his inventory. Besides the raw materials required to produce the HRF armor plating, he lacked pretty much everything else required to build up a Mark Antony. Ves took note of the list of raw materials and visited the local site of the Mech Trade Association. The MTA offered many services to anyone looking to build, buy, or sell a mech. It conveniently partnered with resource wholesalers that allowed them to sell various raw materials through a convenient market interface. To fabricate the HRF requires about 11 million bright credits in raw materials. To purchase the rest of the materials requires just 7 million credits. The total cost comes at 18 million credits. If I charge 24 million credits for the Mark Antony, I'll recoup my cost and earn just enough profit to meet my next interest payment. Selling a mech that priced at 24 million credits was much easier than one that demanded more than double the amount. It cost 45 million credits in total to cover the raw materials for the Caesar Augustus. The materials for the Augustus proprietary armor plating cost 38 million credits alone, and VES lacked the facilities required to process exotic materials into advanced armor plating. These prices look reliable, but it's not entirely reflective of the entire market. VES noted carefully, remembering what he learned in college about running a business. I'm sure there's plenty of private agreements between a small group of partners that offer substantially lower prices. VES curiously inspected the market prices for the Caesar Augustus and its close variants. The official base model produced by National Aeromotive sold for a whopping 65 million credits. Naturally, as the original manufacturer and with the now mature Jason Kozlowski at the helm, the CA-1 produced by NA was top quality. The few mech designers that have licensed the Caesar Augustus sold the base model or its close variants for around 55 to 60 million credits. Perhaps they also offered lower prices, though they used private sales channels in order to conduct such business. The MTA's internal market site only listed public offerings, which in the mech business is considered the tip of the iceberg. As a tiny mech designer with a one-man business with no reputation, I don't possess the qualifications to seek out deals that are more favorable to me. I can only purchase the materials I require at market prices. This presented a big problem to VES. The materials needed to build up the frame, power reactor, engines and everything else amounted to 7 million, which is 2 million more than he owed in his upcoming interest payment. As VES had no ability to draw another loan, he had no way of purchasing the required materials without receiving an advance payment from a customer. That's also going to be a little tricky. The private mech business used to be pretty chaotic. Customers sometimes refused to pay up, leaving the manufacturer in the hole. Sometimes the customer paid on time, but used the new mech they acquired to extort the manufacturer into returning the money. Sometimes, manufacturers also screwed their customers in return. They used substandard materials and inferior components to fool their customers into believing they paid for quality when instead they got nothing but a fake. The establishment of the transgalactic MTA curtailed most instances of fraud and robbery. Customers looking to buy a reliable mech used the MTA as a middleman. The MTA certified each mech that passed through their hands, and made sure the mech conformed to the submitted and agreed upon design between the seller and buyer. Mech designers and manufacturers also benefited from the MTA. For the cost of 1% of a mech sales price, they could take advantage of its many services, such as certification, access to the internal market, to letting them take care of collecting payment from the buyer. It provided a safe platform to do business for many small and medium-sized businesses. The MTA, though officially a charity, also acted as enforcers. They rigidly enforced the prohibitions on installing weapons of mass destruction onto mechs. Any violators caught with dabbling in forbidden dangers like nukes or viruses would be squashed by the MTA's dreaded compliance department. Each so-called compliant officer who worked for the MTA were at least expert pilots, with most captains reaching the standard of ace pilots. In comparison, Melinda only reached the standard of advanced pilot, which was the minimum skill requirement to receive a piloting position in the Mech Corps. If I do my business through the MTA, I won't need to worry about the authenticity of the advance payment. My customers will also receive some assurance from the organization. Though VES had not yet bought anything from the market, he pre-registered his purchase list in order to notify the sellers of those materials that he might buy them soon. It was nothing more than a notification, but the sellers might prepare for the sale by making sure they had the materials in their inventory and could ship them to the Bright Republic. The Bright Republic is small, so shipping times aren't so bad as long as I can find each material in the domestic market. VES tracked down each material and was relieved there were no problems on that end. With the ultra-fast shipping capabilities of a modern galactic civilization, shipping companies were able to transport all the materials stockpiled in Bentheim to Cloudy Curtain in just 2 days. After that, he contacted the MTA to prepare the paperwork for his expected production. Once he signed some standard contracts and agreements with the MTA and the Bright Republic, a representative of the MTA called him in person. The representative invited VES to go over the legal requirements of producing a mech in the Bright Republic. Your production license covers the permission to produce the weapons that come with the Caesar Augustus. A representative from Bentheim explained over the comm. However, you do not have permission to live fire these weapons even in tests. Furthermore, you are not allowed to produce your own ordnance. This means you may not produce any missiles even if you have the capability to do so from your license. What about the wrist-mounted laser cannons? They're technically operational as soon as they come off the 3D printer. I just need to plug them to an energy source. The representative swiped a couple of designs to Ves. You need to add safeties during the fabrication process that seals the energy weapons. The files I just sent are small presets for your 3D printer. They will automatically incorporate the most optimal safeties to any weapons you produce, but you should always double-check them manually. Will do. I have one final question. Could you tell me if my design has any appeal to the market? The man from the association smiled. We are always ready to offer advice to young entrepreneurs. As for your variant, it is highly unusual to offer an economy variant of an extremely advanced frame such as the Caesar Augustus. The Augustus already has a small demand. Since you have replaced its armor in your design, thus taking away the biggest merit of that particular model, I cannot be certain whether any potentate is willing to invest in your new concept. There is no existing demand for this kind of product, so you should diligently work on your marketing in order to create demand. Understood. I don't have any more questions, so goodbye. Have a nice day. In other words, Ves had to market his design from the ground up. He couldn't steal any customers from the pilots interested in the base model because they were unwilling to buy an inferior version when they had the money for the real thing. Ves should target pilots with less generous bank accounts, but those pilots usually bought dependable front-line models, not discounted advanced mechs. These two categories differed significantly in terms of endurance, maintenance cost and overall longevity. Regular front-line mechs were built to last. I'll cross that bridge when I get there. For the remainder of the time, Ves kept diligently producing the Mark Antony in his virtual workshop. He accumulated a decent amount of experience in fabricating the most troublesome parts, and with his deep knowledge of the frame and its base model he felt confident he could fabricate a functioning mech with his own equipment. The days passed quickly. The day of departure arrived. The Bright Republic offered free transportation to Bentheim for all contestants. As one of many participants to the annual Young Tigers exhibition, Ves joined the crowd of hopeful pilots at the spaceport while holding Lucky to his chest and leading a floating luggage carrier carrying his clothes and other stuff. Man, I don't know why I'm even coming. Only Grant has a shot of reaching the top 10. A young graduate complained. What do you know? A tall and heavy-set pilot said with a sneer. If you manage to reach the top 200, you'll easily be able to land a job at a reputable mercenary corps. I'm not talking about the 5 or 10-man shows, I'm talking about the real deal, like Pritchard's Bannermen or the Red Bishops. Seriously? No wonder my uncle wanted me to participate. The Whitey not only showcases our generation's talent to the Republic, it also acts as a job fair. Plenty of employers are watching the show. If they like a pilot, they don't hesitate to offer a contract. My brother landed a spot with the Craftsman that way. The idle chatter of the potentates unintentionally revealed many useful things to Ves. Besides the government and the Mech Corps, he could also expect a lot of mercenaries to attend. Their main purpose was to look for fresh blood to replenish their ranks. It was questionable whether they'd be open to buy a new mech. Ves had his work cut out for him in the next couple of days. Chapter 29, Bentheim. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The appearance of Ves raised some eyebrows from the pilots and their chaperones. I haven't seen you around in class. One of the men stated as he looked at V's collar. Are you sure you've boarded the right shuttle? Every potentate wore a small pin on their collar, chest or arm that denoted their status. It was an exclusive privilege to the 3.5% that marked them special. With it, they enjoyed priority services, had access to VIP sections, and had their safety taken care of first before the rest could take their turn. The entire scheme originated from the new Robarth Empire, but pretty much every human state other than the Terrans copied the treatment. They also took over the rule that stated that any fraudulent use of such pins invited severe punishment. Security already screened me before letting me in. I'm a participant of the YTE Mech Design competition. Mech Design? A young fresh-faced woman dubiously said. So you're not a pilot? No. That pretty much killed the conversation. The pilots all turned around and went back to their own discussions. The blatant disregard hurt Ves a little, but he had grown used to such behavior ever since he turned 10. Before his genetic aptitude was tested, he behaved just as arrogantly as the other potentates. It took a brutal fall from heaven to realize how conceited he actually behaved. I was a stupid punk back then. I got what I deserved, but the rest ingrained this dismissive behavior. It couldn't be helped. Modern society worshipped martial prowess, and a disproportionate attention was placed on mechs. Sometimes it appeared that society revolved around pleasing potentates. Certainly, placating pilots was important, but the soldiers who bravely enlisted in the other service branches also deserved some honor. Spaceships guarded their borders against capricious aliens while infantrymen occupied territory and cleaned after the messes mechs usually caused when throwing around ordnance. Nothing could be done about it, though, so Ves took the dismissal without complaint. It wasn't as if he achieved anything of note that justified anything more than an absent glance. Only Lucky attracted some attention, but the mostly female pilots were too preoccupied to get distracted by his cuteness. The departure time arrived. The shuttle lifted off after everyone was accounted for. The inter-system shuttle ample power to lift off and escape Cloudy Curtain's atmosphere. Like a sparrow taking flight, the shuttle fluently broke the confines of the planet's gravity and followed a pre-programmed flight out to the nearest Lagrange point in the local star system. Lagrange points provided fast and convenient launch points for FTL. Any shuttle or spaceship capable of traveling faster than light departed from a Lagrange point whenever possible, but were only capable of reaching the edge of a solar system as their destination. While the possibility exists for highly advanced spaceships to arrive at their destination's Lagrange point, the act was considered near suicidal. It was like threading a needle, except one single mistake could cause the ship to smash itself apart in weird gravitational stresses, leaving the debris to fall into the local sun. Everyone played it safe, including the transport shuttle. It took only a moment for the shuttle to reach the nearest Lagrange point. It waited in line as other vessels departed first. Once the shuttle came forward, its sleek and narrow form visibly warped into an elongated form before launching into FTL. The shuttle lurched a little when it entered FTL, but after that the passengers felt nothing else. After hundreds of years of refinement, human FTL technology had earned a track record for safety and reliability. The flight from Cloudy Curtain star system to Bentheim only took less than a day due to Bentheim's favorable gravitational position. It made traveling to the economic heart of the Bright Republic convenient. Besides having no one to talk to, Ves enjoyed the flight. Once the shuttle arrived at the edge of Bentheim star system, it flew towards one of border outposts Bentheim established to meet incoming vessels. Smaller systems such as Cloudy Curtain normally wouldn't bother with this formality, but a major port like Bentheim necessitated increased security checks. Many ships formed an orderly line in the space set with beacons. Small patrol ships flew alongside them, scanning their interior for any contraband while determining their origins and destinations. The shuttle from Cloudy Curtain only warranted a brief scan before being let through by the space security forces. The passenger shuttle nimbly navigated deeper in the system like a fish swimming along a river. It passed by several plodding haulers and then heavily armed warships. It kept its distance from rickety-looking mercenary ships and anything else that hinted of danger. After half a day's flight, they finally approached the planetary orbit of Bentheim. From above, the heavily populated planet looked like a paradise that mixed greenery with high-tech urban development. Ever since Bentheim established itself as the premier port of the Republic, the government invested trillions of credits in its ability to accommodate an endless amount of visitors and cargo. The shuttle landed at a crowded spaceport near the capital city called Durham. Ves, the pilots and their chaperones were practically booted out of the shuttle. As soon as they stepped out, the shuttle left in order to make way for another passenger shuttle. Captain Gillian, the lead supervisor of the contestants from Cloudy Curtain, led them to a prepared atmospheric transport that brought them to a hotel near the venue. After leaving the shuttle, they entered the hotel in order to check in and left behind their luggage. "Alright pilots, the Young Tigers exhibition officially starts tomorrow. You're free for the rest of the day, so go play at the local game center or shop until you run out of credits. I only have a few rules that I hope you can follow for your sake." The captain lifted up a finger. "First, be at the venue at 6 o'clock local time. If your comms haven't automatically adjusted their internal clocks, do so now. Tardiness is no excuse." A couple of pilots activated their comms, and some of them had to adjust their settings. "Second, you'll be tested for any drugs or intoxicants the moment you enter, so for God's sake don't go party in a club and get smashed. More than a handful of contestants find their qualifications revoked after imbibing a suspicious drink. Don't rule out sabotage from your competitors. There's spies and agents everywhere in the city." This caused a couple of pilots to gulp, though most of them snorted or dismissed the warning as a fantasy. As natives of Cloudy Curtain, the people in power never paid much attention to them. The best pilots of the Republic all graduated from institutions in Bentheim or Rittersburg. Third, do not get into an altercation with your rivals from other pilots. We're all briters here, so don't lower your standing in front of the foreigners. We have guests from all over the star sector here, so keep your roles in mind. The young men and women appeared to listen attentively, but Ves knew most of it would be thrown right out the window a few seconds later. If you break any of these rules, don't expect to participate in the Young Tigers exhibition. You're grown-ups, so bear the consequences of your screw-ups yourself. With the rest of the late afternoon and evening free, Ves exited the hotel holding Lucky against his chest alongside the other participants. The mechanical cat opened its artificial eyes wide as it beheld the exciting view in front of him. The crowded thoroughfares revealed that even at the outskirts, the capital hosted a lot of guests at this time. Every YTE was a celebration of martial might, so the Bright Republic hosted a couple of other activities to accompany the event. The mech design competition was just one of many additions. Let's see. Tomorrow's the qualifiers, the day after that is the main event. Once the YT ends, I'll have to return to Cloudy Curtain immediately if I want to fabricate and deliver my mech in time. Ves had very little time left, so even his free time should be spent on improving his chances of doing well in the competition. Let's visit the mech showrooms. As the commercial capital of a port system, Durham featured hundreds of mech museums, mech dealers, and mech workshops. It featured a healthy local ecosystem that made it convenient for many people in the mech business to run a business. Unfortunately, the rent was prohibitively expensive and the competition was cutthroat. A new entrant with no existing connections to the industry had no chance of establishing a workshop in Durham, or anywhere else on Bentheim for that matter. Ves chose to set up his workshop in Cloudy Curtain not just because it was his home, but more due to the low taxes and hassle-free regulations. Besides, shipping stuff to and from Bentheim from Cloudy Curtain isn't expensive at all. It makes little difference except for the difficulty of attracting customers. In a major metropolis like Durham, most avenues and streets featured greenery, art and seating of all kinds. Most transportation traveled far underground or high up in the air, so the bustling city never appeared congested. He entered one of the tunnels, slapped his comm against the scanning block, and waited for a small hover car to appear before him. A number of passengers including Ves and Lucky entered the car before it closed up and zipped deeper into the heart of the city. Ves opened his comm and studied the map of the city. He entered a few search parameters and found a listing of mech showrooms open to the public. Narrowing the list down further, he was finally left with 3 venues that featured the Caesar Augustus. 2 places showed off the base model, while the remaining showroom hosted a variant. After arriving downtown, Ves took a smaller underground vehicle in order to bring him to the first venue called Bosworth's, a giant branch of one of the biggest commercial dealers of civilian mechs in the star sector. With the name of the company emblazoned at the front of the stadium-sized showroom, it attracted countless of pilots and enthusiasts every day. After paying a small fee at the entrance, VS entered the interior of the showroom and found his way to the section where their Caesar Augustus was hosted. After several minutes of appreciating the other mechs on display, he finally reached one of Bosworth's prized possession. VS squeezed through a crowd of hundreds as they admired and took pictures of the tall, majestic mech. Seeing it in person made the trip worth it to VS. He built the mech and several of his personally developed variants many times by hand, but eventually he had to admit his only real experience was in a virtual workshop. How could working with digital code compare to working with real metals and real components? Even from a healthy distance, VS felt the Caesar Augustus emanate an air of majesty. It was as if the model was an emperor of mechs, and that it was natural for all other mechs to bow before his presence. This craftsmanship is good. It's not a standard model by National Aeromotives, that's for sure. With his deep knowledge of the Caesar Augustus, he noticed a few minute traces that spoke of a different fabrication philosophy than what N.A. or Jason Kozlowski adhered to. These personal touches brought the base model along a different path to its peak. I wonder if the craftsman who worked on this particular model is aware of how he meshed his own thoughts into the model. With his extensive research on the X factor, VS started to get a rudimentary sixth sense for the phenomenon. He spent plenty of time watching replays of the Seventh Snake and Melinda in action, so he knew vaguely how the X factor was expressed. He tried to identify the vague sensations of emotions the model emanated, however faintly. It feels. The fabricator is old. Experienced. He treated the Augustus as his magnum opus, his best work. He must not have licensed the model himself, but got the opportunity to fabricate it once somehow, perhaps because he got hired for a single job. He relished the chance of being involved with building up an advanced mech, so he treated the work reverently. The unconscious feeling of worship the old fabricator felt towards the model unintentionally enhanced the end product's awe. Perhaps that was why Bosworth acquired this particular specimen and showed it off in public. It certainly enhanced the chain's prestige. This was a worthwhile visit. I see now that there's a slightly different way of regarding the Caesar Augustus. VS naturally refused to adopt such a servile philosophy. He believed that men were masters over the machine. No matter how sophisticated the mech, it's still created as a vehicle for a pilot to protect or destroy. Naturally, with his recent studies of the X factor, his views had adjusted slightly, but only in the sense that mechs performed best when they were created as similar-minded partners to their pilots. There was no need to go overboard and act as if humans were the slaves in this relationship. After the fruitful visit, VS left Bosworth's and walked down a couple of blocks and visited another company's showroom. Though smaller, the seller mainly sold premium mechs, so it received even more attention from the public. A long line of visitors waited in front of the store and VES had to cough up a much higher fee to finally enter the premises. Seeing the magnificent mechs all around him made him feel he was in mech heaven. But since he was short on time, he only threw a glance before reaching his destination. The Caesar Augustus VES saw was virtually identical to the first one. Nevertheless, compared to the previous mech which managed to look imperial, this example seemed diminished. Perhaps it was due to the different lighting, or the fact that other expensive mechs surrounded it, but the mech that VES seemed diminished. Many people were involved in its construction. The contours and components rigidly adhere to the standards demanded by its design, but that's the only advantage this model has. It's like this model is built by an assembly line. It was a manner of fabricating that spoke of scale, precision and efficiency. Instead of letting one fabricator make all the components by hand, a factory employed many people who all specialize in fabricating one single component. There would be one guy who makes only sensors, another person who's in charge of armor plating, and so on. This specialization ensured they maintained quality while keeping up a decent production pace. One of the worst things that could happen to a large-scale manufacturer is the occurrence of faults, so employing specialists or AIs that could take over such a role was key in maintaining consistency. It works if all you care about is the technical performance of the mech. VES commented, feeling regretful that the manufacturer had not brought this mech to its full potential. I can't say I blame them. You can't measure X factor. Even though I learned so much, even the most renowned experts must still not have any means of quantifying the X factor. You couldn't put any value in an attribute that couldn't be seen or heard. Plenty of mechs with a high potential of X factor were treated like disposable trash. That was because industry standards favored mass production over individual craftsmanship. Even the mech designers that start a business by themselves let their employees take over the tedious work of fabricating his models when the designer achieved success. They only bothered crafting handmade versions of their mech to familiarize themselves with the model and fix any production issues that might occur. After leaving the showroom, Ves intended to visit the showroom with the customized version of the Augustus. However, after his comm beeped an alert, he knew he had to return to the hotel. The qualifiers for the YT started tomorrow morning and he had to wake up early in order to make it in time. The time for me to prove myself is about to come. He grinned, relishing the chance to showcase his newly acquired abilities in front of a stage. Chapter 30, Qualifiers. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Bentheim hosted the Young Tigers exhibition in a large, multi-building convention complex built for the purpose. It occupied a gigantic amount of prime real estate that offered plenty of space to the tourists and mech enthusiasts who visited the event. Naturally, the organizers treated mech pilot competition as the main event. The opening ceremony and the introduction of the star pilots commenced while the qualifiers of the mech design competition occurred in a smaller and much less crowded side building. Before he did anything else, Ves checked his status and noticed he finally accumulated 300 DP. With this amount, he immediately bought the jury rigging 2 subskill, which induced another minor headache for him. It made him get ready for the day a bit later than he thought. Even as he rushed his breakfast, he still had to sort out the strange way the system rearranged his brain. Time's almost up. Captain Gillian called at the dining room. Gather at the lobby of the hotel. Ves left his gem cat in his hotel room this time. It was not appropriate for him to bring Lucky along as he competed. Not just because pets weren't allowed, but also due to the possibility of cheating, so he came to the qualifiers alone. Compared to the festive bombast of the main event, the mech designer competition was a subdued event that attracted only a fraction of the crowd. Most of those attending were friends and family of the mech designers. The real crowd would show up tomorrow, when only the 8 best competitors came up on stage. Ves. Wow man, nice to see you. A chubby young man with flaring pink hair spotted Ves and came over with a cheerful smile. Man, we haven't been in touch ever since we graduated. It's like you fell into a black hole. Ves smiled and bumped his former classmate with his fist. Hey Carlos. I've been having some trouble at home. Starting your own mech design workshop is harder than it looks. You actually went through with it. Never mind the hardware, how are you even capable of paying for the licenses? I had a little luck there. Ves proceeded to fill in most of what he did the last 2 months to his friend. Carlos Shaw looked at Ves with a mixed expression. I can't decide whether you're a lucky bastard or not. Only the dumbest grant institutes would give you a production license for the Caesar Augustus. Yeah, I'm still racking my head around trying to reproduce it without getting bankrupt. That's also why I'm here. I have to find a customer for my first mech or else I'm in deep shit. I envy your independence. You should see what I do for a living nowadays. My dad got me a connection to the quality control department of a wholesaler here in Bentheim. Carlos followed the path of many other mech designers who graduated from Rittersberg. They started at the bottom in large corporations. Like many other young graduates, Carlos' current job had nothing to do with mech design in any shape or way. The only thing the job required of him was to test the mechs that the company imported and note which parts were faulty. Carlos might be an average mech designer, but with the things he learned in college he was an overqualified mech technician. Basically, any mech designer that hadn't studied from one of the renowned universities from at least a second-rate human state could forget about entering the world of real mech design. The pathetic state of this industry in the Bright Republic was perhaps the biggest reason why it held this competition. The government wanted to stimulate a domestic mech industry, or at least not become too dependent on foreign transgalactic corporations. They chit-chat a little more on what they experienced after graduation. After waiting in line, security confirmed their credentials and allowed them to enter the waiting room for contestants. Already about 100 young mech designers sat on the comfortable seats or caught up with their friends and acquaintances. Ves spotted a few more notable classmates, including the top student Patricia Schneider. Her parents worked at mid-level positions at Bosworth's, which might not sound impressive but represented the apex of local influence in the huge corporation. With Patricia's background, she should have been qualified to study at a prestigious university from a second-rate state. Instead, she stayed in the Bright Republic and attended the Rittersberg University of Technology like the other poor and untalented locals. How much do you think Patricia's chances are of winning first place? About 20%. Carlos casually estimated. I heard she somehow managed to catch the attention of a senior mech designer and became his apprentice. No idea who he is, but that's what people are telling me. They're even saying that the mech designer tutored Patricia during her studies in our college. No wonder she managed to score full marks in every theoretical test. Yeah, thank God she's not as good in practicals, or else she'd wipe the floor of this contest. Rubbing his chin, Ves turned away from Patricia and looked at a couple of other contestants. A few held up their chests in a more confident posture, very unlike a local student. They practically oozed the same level of superiority as potentates. I've spotted at least 7 Ponces who studied abroad at an elite university. Carlos said, as he was much more familiar with the people he studied with at Rittersberg. I don't know who most of them are, but I do recognize that bastard Edwin McKinney. The young man in question stood in front of a gaggle of admirers. His face oozed as much superiority as all the other elites in the room put together. What's his background? He attended a university in the new Rubarth Empire. Dunno what's the name, but it's Rubarthan, so who cares? Even though it's not one of the elite institutions at Estilon, he still prances about his prestige whenever he can. It's as if he's an enlightened gentleman bringing civilization to us savages. Though it sounded ugly, the attention was not unwarranted. Even Ves felt the urge to pick Edwin's brains on the latest development in mechs. Studying mech design in a random NR university was a wholly different concept than studying the same degree in a backwater country like the Bright Republic. Even the cheapest trash mechs the NRE fielded in their mech core were at least 2 generations. Advanced technologies that sounded like fantasy to Ves was commonplace in those mighty first-rate states. Ves felt a little regret he hadn't studied harder in his teenage years. If he worked hard and achieved better results back then, he might have received the opportunity to attend an elite institution in a second or first-rate state. We live in different worlds. It's no use associating with him. Better focus on your own career. Ves advised, though the real reason he acted nonchalant was because he could rely on the Mech Designer System to overcome these rivals in the future. It was an advantage he was certain not even the best young mech designers possessed. With its power, he had a real shot at reaching the apex of mech design. All it took was time. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Bright Republic's best and brightest. An attendant gestured the contestants to exit the waiting room. They arrived in front of a podium with all 150 contestants present. They bowed before a crowd of familiar and unfamiliar faces. The presenter was a silver-haired man with a robust voice, likely another veteran of the Mech Corps. As you can see, it would be too extravagant to allocate a personal workshop and quota of parts to each contestant. With the help of the convention center's holographic projectors, we can nevertheless save space and resources by conducting the qualifiers in a virtual reality with unprecedented realism. A few groans escaped the lips of the contestants. They all wanted to play around with real mech parts and were hopeful this time was different. Now, just like last year, we wish to present our young mech designers with the challenge of designing and assembling a functioning mech from pre-selected parts. It is not a challenge to make a mech work, but it takes skill and talent to create the best mech from suboptimal parts. Your task is to create a mech that will be tested in a standard 10-kilometer gauntlet. Your mechs will all be test piloted by Hans over here. Another veteran mech pilot waved his hand from the side. Who is a strict professional and will treat any mech the same. Any questions? How much time do we have? 12 hours from the start of the qualifiers. Are there any limits on weight class and weaponry? The presenter grinned. Design any mech you want at your heart's content. We do not place any limits on the design so long it fits the definition of a mech. Do you want to stick 4 arms on a mech? Fine. Do you want to design a mech with its torso upside down? Go ahead. We specifically enlisted the aid of Hans because he is an all-rounder. He can pilot light, medium and heavy mechs with the same proficiency. He has plenty of experience piloting the most popular animal designs as well. He can kill the same amount of enemies whether he's given a sword or a rifle. Is he an AI? That elicited a bit of laughter from the people present. I can assure you, he is 100% Homo sapiens. That actually reassured Ves. His only advantage over the other contestants was his ability to actualize the X-factor in a mech. If his finished product gets tested by an artificial intelligence, then he seriously doubted the emotionally lifeless software program would notice the difference. Very well, if there are no more questions, then please take your place at the designated areas. If you don't possess a tactile implant, then please wear the provided gloves in order to ensure you can move the holographic projections around. Most mech designers had implanted their bodies with technologies that allowed them to touch holograms as if they were real items. It didn't convey the weight of the objects, but it functioned properly enough for today's purposes. On your mark. Get set. Go. The empty spaces in front of each participant shimmered as a miniature pile of holographic parts and mech frames littered their view. It looked like someone took out a random pile of parts from a junkyard and put them in front of everyone. The only thing that separated it from junk was that the parts looked new and unused and that every participant had to work with the same parts. When Ves approached a power reactor and tried to touch it, the component enlarged until it reached its real proportions. So that's how they save space here. It made sense to scale down the unused parts. Otherwise the entire venue ran out of space to hold 150 contestants if they all worked on full-scale components. Ves looked around how others fared with the impending challenge. Most looked at the pile of junk and got briefly overwhelmed. Carlos scratched his head as he slowly went over his options. Patricia Schneider immediately chose a fairly standard humanoid internal frame and started sorting through different components to add to her new mech. As for Edwin McKinney, the young elite chose a bold direction for his mech. He chose to pair a lightweight eagle-shaped mech with a robust flight system. Such a combination would result in a flyer that hovers between the light and medium weight class, which was not a good area to fall into. Ves suspected that Edwin had a few surprises in store. As for his own design, he took a brief look at the components available. Most of the parts seemed outdated, roughly around 2 to 4 generations old. In Iron Spirit, these parts would be considered 3-star or 4-star parts, somewhat advanced for novice mech designers but not to the point of overwhelming them if they stuck to the simpler parts. The standard parts were all within his competence. Instead of starting to pick the parts he preferred, Ves took a different approach. He studied Hans, the test pilot for his competition design, and thought about the presenter's description of him. If Ves wanted to make it out of the qualifiers, he had to use his strengths, and that meant integrating the X-factor into his design. It's a risk if I go this route. If I let my emotions instead of logic drive my design, then I won't make the most optimal choices. Other mechs will have better specs than mine. Yet what does it matter if his mech performed worse than other mechs by 5% or so? Only the mechs that performed the best in the gauntlet made it through the qualifiers. No matter how many bells and whistles a designer added to the mech, if Hans didn't use it to its full potential, then it wasn't a good design. The product had to fit the pilot, not the mech designer's preferences. What kind of mech does Hans prefer to pilot the most? Too bad Ves wasn't allowed to access the galactic net during this competition. He only had the brief story from the presenter to make a guess. What was this pilot's greatest strength? Versatility. Hans could pilot almost every mech in the market. That took a lot of training. This man dedicated much of his piloting career learning how to pilot many different kinds of mechs. He practiced shoring up both his melee and ranged weapon skill until he could use them interchangeably without affecting his battle strength. Perhaps it was a coincidence, but Ves thought a mech like the Mark Antony fit Hans well. The medium mech offered maximum flexibility, allowing Hans to dodge attacks that could be dodged and tank what he could withstand. With a mace and shield, Hans could tear any mech apart except for heavy knights, and with his wrist-mounted laser cannons he could shoot down anyone from mid-range. The lack of endurance wouldn't be much of an issue, considering the mech only had to go through a short but intensive 10-kilometer gauntlet. There's no need to seek out a particular extreme. If I have the chance to use my familiarity to my advantage, then I should take it. There's no shame in using a design I know well as a reference. As long as my design can do the job, then Hans will easily pass through the gauntlet. Ves finally stepped forward and picked a couple of promising but also fitting components. He envisioned the mech he had in mind for a pilot with a broad set of skills. First, the mech should be a medium weight in order to maintain the mech's flexibility. The mech should be a flyer, but the wings don't need to be strong. Flight is just a means to an end. Next, it needs a balanced focus on melee and ranged offensive options. What Ves imagined Hans preferred to pilot was a workhorse model. It shouldn't be too fancy, and it doesn't need all the bells and whistles. The design needed to do the job and nothing more. Through this process of thought, Ves imagined the competition organizers implied much more than what they revealed on the surface. They presented us with a pile of parts, some of them more advanced than we ought to know how to handle. Ves shook his head and glanced at his fellow mech designers who seemingly went crazy at the possibilities. It's actually a subtle trap. If we get carried away with forcing an advanced component into an unsuitable design, then Hans won't be able to perform that well and won't be able to endure in the gauntlet. Ves felt a little confident in his chances now. While the likes of Patricia and Edwin remained superior contestants, he felt he stood a chance of making it in the bottom of the top 8. Let's see if I can recreate the ghetto version of the Mark Antony with these parts.